Wednesday night in the 1960s, black household was not leftovers night. It was the night the real cooking happened. While the rest of the week ran on whatever was quick and cheap, the middle of the week got its own dedicated meal, something slow, something intentional, because that family had already been working for 3 straight days and nobody was about to sit down to a cold plate. Pork neck bones simmering with rice, smothered chicken with gravy so thick you could stand a spoon in it. Cornbread baked in a cast iron skillet that had not been washed with soap in 20 years. These were not fancy meals. They were not restaurant meals. They were the dinners that held a household together on an ordinary evening, and almost every single one of them has disappeared from the modern table. Here are 100 forgotten African American dinners that every family in the 1960s ate weekly. Number 25, smothered rabbit. In the rural South, a rabbit caught Saturday morning became Sunday dinner without anyone thinking twice about it. The rabbit was cut into pieces, dredged in seasoned flour, and browned in a cast iron skillet. Then onions went in, a cup of broth, and the lid came down for 2 hours. The meat turned tender enough to fall off the bone, sitting in a thick brown gravy that tasted like the woods it came from. Rabbit was leaner than chicken and carried a mild, earthy sweetness that no farm bird could match. Families in Mississippi, Alabama, and East Texas kept rabbit on a Sunday table well into the 1970s. The boys trapped them or shot them with the .22 in the fields behind the house. When fewer families hunted and grocery stores offered no replacement, the dish left the kitchen and never came back. Number 25, neck bones and okra. Okra grew wild in southern gardens every summer, shooting up so fast that a missed day of picking meant woody, tough pods. But young okra, sliced thin and dropped into a pot of neck bones that had been going since morning, did something no other vegetable could. It thickened the broth on its own. The natural mucilage turned the pot liquor heavy and silky without a pinch of flour. Families across Alabama and the Mississippi Delta cooked this from June straight through September, when okra came in faster than anyone could use it fresh. The bones gave the pot its depth. The okra gave it body. Some threw in a handful of garden tomatoes to cut the thickness. Others left it alone, ladled over rice in a wide bowl. It was not gumbo. It was older than gumbo, and it asked for less. Number 25, neck bones and rice. This was the dish that proved a family could eat well on the scraps the butcher almost threw away. Pork neck bones were the bones left after the good cuts were sold off, sold cheap because there was barely a bite of meat clinging to them. But black Southern cooks knew the secret was the long simmer. They covered those bones in water, dropped in an onion and a little garlic, and let the pot go for 2 or 3 hours until the meat fell off and the broth turned dark and rich. Then they cooked the rice right in that stock, so every grain soaked up the flavor of the bone. What looked like nothing on a cutting board became a steaming bowl that filled a grown man up after a day in the field. The trick was patience, not money, tender meat, savory rice, and a broth worth keeping. A whole supper out of what others called waste. Number 25, salt pork and cabbage pot. A blue speckled enamel pot on a wood range in 1943 Birmingham. 3/4 full of water, 1 head of cabbage chopped rough, a piece of salt pork the size of a child's fist. The cook cut the rind into a cross so the fat would render slow. By the time the cabbage went limp, the pork had given up enough grease to coat every leaf. The kitchen smelled the vinegar from the porch jar she kept by the door. 4 ingredients, 1 fire, a wooden spoon worn smooth from 20 years of use. None of it was banned by law. The supermarket just stopped stocking the rind by 1972. She served it with a wedge of corn pone and a glass of cold buttermilk on the side. Your grandmother knew the dish by smell. Her grandmother had cooked it through the Depression. You have never tasted it. Your kitchen does not even keep the pot anymore. Number 25, corn pudding. Plain cornbread, spent all year feeding the family. But on Easter Sunday, that same cornmeal got dressed up. 6 ears of fresh corn scraped into a bowl with eggs, whole milk, and real butter, baked until the top turned golden and the inside set into a custard so soft you needed a spoon to serve it. This was the dish that said humble ingredients could be sacred if you treated them right. Enslaved people had survived on cornmeal rations all year long, 1 peck per week. That was the standard. So when Easter came and a free black woman turned that same grain into something worthy of the risen Lord's Day, she was rewriting what cornmeal meant. By the 1970s, corn pudding was a standard Easter side across the South. Today, over 80% of corn pudding recipes use canned corn and Jiffy mix. The custard version, the one that required patience and fresh eggs and a kitchen that smelled like spring, has nearly vanished. Your grandmother did not need a recipe. She needed a cast iron dish and 45 minutes. Salmon croquettes from a can were one of the most common quick meals in African American kitchens from the 1940s onward, when canned pink salmon cost less than $1 and sat in the pantry for months. The salmon was drained, bones removed by feel, then mixed with crushed saltine crackers, a beaten egg, diced onion, and black pepper, shaped into flat patties and fried in cast iron with just enough oil to cover the bottom. They crisped up golden in minutes. The outside crackled when you bit through, giving way to a soft, flaky center that tasted like the sea and the South at once. For seniors eating alone, 2 croquettes on a plate with a slice of white bread was a full dinner. Every grandmother had her own ratio of cracker to salmon, and she never wrote it down. You learned it by standing beside her, watching her hands. When she was gone, the patties never came out quite the same. A tin key, a slow peel of metal, and the sharp smell of oil and salt.
Neckbone stew with potatoes was the kind of dinner that proved black mothers in the 1960s could turn almost nothing into something that fed both the body and the spirit. Neckbones were one of the cheapest cuts in the store, thrown into the bargain bin because no one with extra money wanted them. But mothers knew better. They scrubbed the bones clean, set them in a deep pot, and covered them with water until the kitchen filled with the slow rising scent of broth. Potatoes were added later, cut into big chunks so they could soak up every bit of the flavor. The stew simmered for hours, bubbling gently while children drifted in and out of the kitchen, hungry long before dinner was ready. By the time the pot was done, the neck bones were tender, the potatoes were soft, and the broth was rich in a way only time could create. Mothers ladled it into bowls with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had stretched scraps into a full meal for an entire family. It tasted like warmth, patience, and the kind of love that works behind the scenes. Neckbone stew with potatoes was survival food made beautiful through care. Neckbone gravy over rice became the foundation when turkey was beyond reach, transforming the cheapest cuts into liquid gold that satisfied entire families. Black mothers would simmer pork or beef neck bones for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the meat felt tender and the broth turned rich. The bones cost pennies per pound at butcher shops, yet held marrow that created gravy with body and soul. Women knew that patience turned scarcity into abundance, letting those bones bubble on back burners from morning until afternoon. The finished gravy was thick, savory, and packed with protein from the shredded meat. Poured generously over white rice, this combination stretched to feed 20 people when turkey could barely serve 8. Children sopped up every drop with cornbread, while adults appreciated how resourcefulness created satisfaction without shame. Neckbone gravy wasn't poverty food, but proof that love and skill mattered more than money. Smothered pork chops were never just dinner. They were Sunday peace served on a plate. Tender cuts of pork simmered slow in a bath of onion gravy until every bite could melt right off the bone. For many families, this was the closest thing to a feast after a long week of labor. The scent alone filled the house, thick with warmth, the kind of smell that told you someone cared enough to cook slow. This was the meal mothers and grandmothers made when money was thin, but love was plenty. It took patience, a steady hand, and the wisdom to make a small portion feed everyone. Flour from the pantry thickened the gravy, and onions from the garden brought it to life. A scoop of rice or mashed potatoes on the side turned it into a full spread. Around that table, laughter mixed with steam, and nobody felt poor anymore. The sound of the spoon scraping the pan at the end was a kind of quiet gratitude. Smothered pork chops were proof that food could be both humble and holy, something made from little that still tasted like everything. Hoover stew was the meal that kept families fed when the pantry looked bare and the paychecks had stopped. It was a pot of survival, bubbling with whatever a family could gather, usually macaroni, canned tomatoes, and slices of hot dog that stretched further than anyone thought possible. Every house had its own version, passed along like a secret recipe of endurance. Sometimes it was soupy, sometimes thick enough to stand a spoon in, but always hearty. Mothers would stir the pot with tired hands, humming gospel songs as the smell of tomato and salt filled the room. The macaroni swelled, the hot dogs bobbed like little treasures, and children waited with bowls clutched tight. It was the taste of making do, of not giving up when cupboards were empty and spirits low. Hoover stew was more than a meal. It was proof that a little imagination could turn struggle into supper, and that warmth came as much from hope as it did from heat. Lima beans and rice were the heartbeat of humble suppers. The dry beans soaked overnight in cool water, swelling with promise. The next morning, they simmered with onions, salt, and sometimes a scrap of ham or a spoon of lard for flavor. The smell drifted through small kitchens, soft and soothing, like the memory of peace. When the beans turned creamy, rice joined the plate, a mound of comfort waiting to catch every drop of the broth. It was food that filled you without fuss, a steady meal that kept the body strong and the soul calm. Grandparents stirred it slow, never wasting a grain or bean. The dish stretched across days, reheated, shared, and remembered. Each bite was a reminder that survival could taste good, that frugality did not mean lack. Lima beans and rice were the taste of balance, simple, complete, and deeply human. When money was thin and work was long, this was the dinner that never failed, a pot of patience feeding everyone who came hungry. Braised turkey wings with pan gravy brought families together around a big Sunday table when the 1970s called for dinners that were both hearty and affordable. Large turkey wings were seasoned with garlic, black pepper, and a dusting of paprika before browning in a heavy skillet to build a deep flavor base. They were then slow roasted in a covered pan with onions, celery, and homemade stock until the meat grew so tender it slid from the bone. The drippings were whisked into a silky pan gravy that soaked perfectly into a mound of steamed white rice or buttered cornbread. The rich aroma filled the house and made even a simple weeknight feel like a celebration. Home cooks appreciated how the dish stretched a few inexpensive pieces of poultry into a feast that felt as grand as a holiday meal. In many African American kitchens, this recipe became a quiet statement of resourcefulness and comfort, a way to honor tradition while feeding everyone well when money was tight, but hearts were full of welcome. Potato and onion gravy over cornbread was one of those suppers that stretched simple ingredients into something far more satisfying than it looked. Families who did not have access to meat would fry onions in leftover drippings, add water and flour, and stir it into a thick brown gravy. That gravy, poured over wedges of cornbread, turned into a filling plate that could quiet hunger at the end of a long day. The onions gave sweetness, the drippings added depth, and the cornbread soaked it all up like a sponge. In African American households across the South, this became a dependable way to feed large families on very little. Cornmeal was cheap, onions were plentiful, and gravy turned scraps into a real meal. Children might not have known they were eating out of necessity, because it tasted comforting and rich. This dish has faded as quick meals replaced slow stove cooking, but for many who grew up with it, the memory of potato and onion gravy over cornbread still means home and survival. This was not your average stew. Son of a Gun stew was a chuck wagon classic, made from every edible part of a calf: heart, liver, marrow, tongue, and sometimes even the brain if it had not gone to the dogs first. Cowboys did not waste a single bite, and the trail cook was expected to know how to turn those scraps into something halfway decent. The stew simmered in cast iron over open flame, thickened with flour or old coffee grounds, and flavored with salt if you were lucky enough to have it. A pot of Son of a Gun was more than food. It was a reminder that survival meant using everything you had, no matter how it looked or smelled going in. It filled you up, kept your strength, and tasted better than it had any right to after riding a horse all day. The name? That came from the fact that nobody ever wanted to admit what was actually in it. This was food for hard men under hard skies, and it stuck to your bones like nothing else.
Number 24, stewed ox tongue. The tongue came from the butcher wrapped in brown paper, heavy and muscular, and it went straight into a pot of boiling water with onion, bay leaves, and black peppercorns. 3 hours later, the outer skin peeled off in one sheet, revealing pale, tender meat underneath. Sliced thick and laid into a gravy of tomatoes, garlic, and thyme, the tongue simmered for another hour until the slices could be cut with a fork. The texture was unlike any other beef on the table, dense, smooth, almost creamy. In black kitchens across the rural South, tongue was a Sunday dish that required no apology and no explanation. The older women served it with pride. The children ate it without knowing what it was until they were old enough to ask. When supermarkets replaced butcher counters and customers stopped requesting whole organs, the tongue disappeared from the case and from the table at the same time. Number 24, smothered neck bones with onion gravy. The bones were browned first in a cast iron skillet, then buried under sliced yellow onions that cooked down until they turned soft and sweet. A little flour went into the pan drippings to thicken it. The gravy built itself around the bones, dark and rich and heavy enough to stand a spoon in. This was not a light meal. This was a plate you set down in front of someone who had been working outside since dawn. The onion gravy went over white bread or biscuits, whatever was in the house, and it stretched that meal another day. In parts of Georgia and the Carolinas, smothered neck bones showed up on Sundays when the family could not afford a proper roast. Number 24, fried bologna. Long before it became a punchline, this was an honest meal that kept many families going. During the Depression, bologna was often the only meat a household could afford, and it was frequently the only meat on hand. Cooks would slice it thick, cut little slits around the edge so it would not dome up in the pan, and fry it in a hot skillet until the edges curled and browned. That crisp ring around the outside was the whole reward. Pressed between two slices of light bread with a smear of mustard, it became a sandwich that a child could carry to school or a worker could fold into a lunch pail. Sometimes it went over rice with a little gravy made from the drippings. Cheap, fast, and filling, it stretched a few cents into a real plate of food, a humble meal that asked for nothing and gave back plenty. Number 24, hoe cakes with sorghum molasses, a black iron griddle on a kerosene stove in 1944 Tuskegee, smoking hot, bacon grease pooled in the center. The batter was cornmeal, salt, hot water, nothing else. She dropped it by spoonful, 3 at a time, waited for the edges to lace, flipped each round. Each cake came off the size of a saucer, crisp brown skirt, soft yellow heart. The sorghum sat in a tin pitcher on the table, slow and dark as tar. A child got 2 and was full. A working man got 6 and was satisfied. Your grandmother made these the way her mother had during the Depression. A sack of cornmeal lasted you a family 2 weeks. The supper cost 8 cents in 1944. By 1965, the kerosene stove was gone. The hoe cake went with it. You won't find it on any menu now. Number 24, crackling bread. If your family rendered their own lard, you knew this bread. Cracklings were the crispy golden bits left behind after the fat cooked out of the pork. You folded them into cornbread batter and baked the whole thing in a cast iron skillet slicked with bacon drippings. Every bite had a tiny burst of salt and crunch buried in the corn. The standard weekly ration for an enslaved person included 3 to 4 pounds of pork and a peck of cornmeal. Crackling bread was the meal that stretched both to their absolute limit. It fed a whole family on what a wealthier table would have scraped into the trash. Abby Fisher, born enslaved in Alabama, included cornbread variations in her 1881 cookbook published in San Francisco. She could not read or write. Every recipe was dictated from memory to friends who transcribed them. After the Great Migration pulled black families into cities where nobody slaughtered their own hogs, the cracklings disappeared. And when the cracklings disappeared, so did the bread. It was poverty turned into genius, gone when the poverty left. Sardines and crackers with hot sauce needed no stove and no explanation. In black households across the South, a can of sardines was a full meal eaten standing at the counter or sitting by the window with a sleeve of saltines and a bottle of Louisiana or Crystal. They came packed in mustard sauce, tomato sauce, or plain oil, and every person had their preference, argued about with the same conviction as church denominations. You ate them one at a time, laid across a cracker, dotted with hot sauce, followed by a sip of something cold. During the 1950s and 60s, a tin cost 10 or 15 cents, making it one of the cheapest proteins on the shelf. For elderly folks living alone, sardines were dinner on nights when cooking felt like too much and the body just needed fuel. No pan to wash, no grease to cool, just a tin, a knife, and the quiet rhythm of feeding yourself when nobody else was coming to the table. If you didn't cut slits in the bologna before it hit the skillet, you weren't from the right kitchen.
Pinto beans with salt pork were one of the most dependable weekday dinners because dried beans cost almost nothing and could fill a pot big enough to feed everyone for days. Mothers poured the beans into a bowl the night before and let them soak, softening them just enough so they would cook evenly. In the morning, the beans were rinsed, the pot was filled, and a small piece of salt pork was tucked in for flavor. It was rarely more than a square of fat with a bit of meat clinging to it, but that little piece carried the whole dish. As the beans simmered, the house filled with a savory, comforting smell that made children stop whatever they were doing and stand near the stove. Mother stirred the pot slowly, checking the beans until they softened into that creamy, perfect texture. Paired with cornbread or rice, it became a complete dinner. Some families ate this for 2 or 3 nights in a row, each bowl tasting better after sitting overnight. Mothers knew how to adjust the pot with simple seasonings, making the most humble meal feel warm and steady. Pinto beans with salt pork were simple, humble, and deeply loved, the food that made families feel full even when money was scarce. Chitlin dressing appeared on tables when traditional stuffing felt too expensive, turning what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Cleaned thoroughly over hours, chitlins were chopped fine and mixed with cornbread crumbles, celery, onions, sage, and chicken broth stretched as far as possible. The mixture baked until golden on top while staying moist inside, creating dressing that carried intense flavor and connected families to ancestral cooking traditions. Black mothers prepared chitlins as acts of both economy and heritage, knowing their grandmothers had done the same during harder times. The smell was unmistakable, but for those raised with it, chitlin dressing meant Thanksgiving in ways plain bread stuffing never could. A single batch cost less than $3, yet fed the entire gathering. Young people might have initially resisted, But after that first bite, most came back for seconds. Chitlin dressing taught lessons about respecting traditions. Collard greens with ham hock were more than a side. They were survival disguised as soul. Tough greens simmered low and slow in pots blackened by years of use, softened into something rich, savory, and alive with flavor. The ham hock did more than season. It carried history, the memory of people making the best out of what was left. This dish was born in kitchens that knew how to stretch the smallest ingredients into abundance. Every leaf soaked up smoke, salt, and story. The pot liquor, the deep green broth left behind, was liquid gold, rich with nutrients and comfort. Families passed that broth around like a blessing, dipping cornbread into it with quiet reverence. Collard greens stood for more than food. They were a promise that even in hard times, something beautiful could grow from the earth. Cooked right, they reminded everyone at the table that hardship never truly broke them, it only seasoned them. Neck bone stew was the kind of food that demanded patience and rewarded love. Pork neck bones were cheap, meaty enough to flavor a pot, and rich enough to make even plain vegetables taste like a feast. Families would buy a handful from the butcher and let them simmer all afternoon with onions, celery, and carrots until the meat fell off the bone. The broth grew thick and smoky, the kind that clung to spoons and hearts alike. For many, this was the meal that marked Sundays, when everyone crowded into the kitchen, laughing and talking over the bubbling pot. It was not fancy, but it was full of pride. Neck bone stew turned hard times into comfort and hunger into gratitude. The smell alone could bring neighbors knocking, eager for a bowl. In every tender bite was the story of people who knew how to make flavor from scraps and strength from struggle. Turkey necks with gravy turned what many ignored into something worth craving. Grandparents browned the necks first, letting them sizzle in a pan until the air filled with a smoky richness. A bit of flour, water, and thyme turned the drippings into thick brown gravy that coated every piece like velvet. The meat cooked for hours until it slipped clean off the bone, tender and rich with flavor. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, it looked simple but tasted like a feast. The necks may have been cheap, but the love behind them was priceless. Grandparents made the most of what they had, and this meal proved their creativity and care. The gravy was the best part, seasoned just right, spooned generously so nothing went to waste. Everyone at the table ate slow, grateful for the warmth, the smell, and the moment. It was Sunday flavor on a weekday budget, the taste of making do without feeling poor. Turkey necks with gravy were more than a meal. They were a celebration of resilience and resourcefulness that lived in every kitchen where pride cooked alongside hunger. Fried porgy with hot sauce carried the salt air of the Atlantic coast right into neighborhood kitchens and fish fries across the 1970s South and Northeast. Porgy, a small but flavorful ocean fish, was cleaned, scored, and dredged in a seasoned cornmeal mixture before sliding into hot peanut oil. The crackle of frying fish and the sharp scent of cayenne filled the air as golden fillets emerged crisp and steaming. A drizzle of homemade hot sauce or a squeeze of lemon brought just enough heat and brightness to balance the sweet, briny meat. Families served it with sliced white bread, coleslaw, or grits, letting the simple sides highlight the catch of the day. For many households, this was more than a meal. It was a reason for gathering, a chance to laugh and share stories while the fish came out of the pan in batches. Affordable and deeply satisfying, fried porgy celebrated coastal traditions and proved that fresh fish and a steady hand could create a dinner worthy of any weekend crowd. Stewed cabbage with neck bones was a heavy pot supper that reflected the creativity of African American kitchens in the 1950s. Cabbage was cheap, filling, and easy to grow, while pork neck bones could be purchased for next to nothing at local butcher shops. Simmered together slowly, the cabbage soaked up the smoky, savory flavor of the bones, creating a meal that stretched to feed an entire family. A pot of this on the stove meant everyone would eat, even if there was no extra meat to share. Cornbread often accompanied the dish, soaking up the broth that formed at the bottom of the pot. Though humble, it was deeply flavorful and comforting, bringing families around the table after long days. Today, faster cooking and processed meals have replaced the patience of slow-simmered cabbage, but for those who grew up with it, the memory remains strong. Stewed cabbage with neck bones was a dinner born of thrift, tradition, and the determination to make even scraps taste like a feast. Sourdough was the cowboy's best friend, and not just for bread. You could take a little jar of starter across states and still have breakfast wherever you went. These flapjacks were not sweet or soft. They were chewy, dense, and packed with tang from the ferment. Fried right on a skillet greased with leftover pork fat, they went great with salt pork slices, heavily salted meat that was soaked and boiled until edible. Nobody called it elegant, but it worked. Cowboys ate it in the morning if they were lucky, or as a dinner when rations ran low. Salt pork was cheap, kept forever, and did not need refrigeration, which meant it could follow you to the middle of nowhere. These meals were eaten sitting on the ground, leaning against your saddle, with the fire crackling just out of reach. You did not eat for flavor. You ate because tomorrow was another 10 miles and you were already sore. This was fuel, not a feast, but it was also comfort in a place where comfort was rare.
Number 23, oxtail stew over rice. Oxtail sections were dusted with seasoned flour and browned in batches in a cast iron Dutch oven until every surface had a dark crust. Onions, garlic, thyme, and a splash of tomato paste went in next, then enough water to barely cover the bones. The lid went on and the pot moved to a low oven or the back of the stove for 4 hours. By the time the lid came off, the collagen had dissolved into the liquid, turning the broth into something that coated the spoon like varnish. The meat clung to the knobbed vertebrae in small, intensely flavored pockets that had to be worked loose with teeth and fingers. Oxtail was a Sunday staple in Black households from Jamaica to Georgia, carried across the water and adapted to whatever stove was available. The dish required nothing expensive, just time and a willingness to cook something that looked unpromising into something extraordinary. When butcher counters shrank and oxtail jumped in price from pennies a pound to one of the most expensive cuts in the case, the Sunday pot became a luxury that priced out the families who invented it. Number 23, neck bones and mustard greens. Mustard greens had a bite that no other green in the garden could match. Raw, they burned the back of the tongue. Cooked low in a pot of neck bones for 2 hours, that burn softened into a peppery warmth that cut clean through the richness of the pork. Families in Alabama and Mississippi planted mustard greens alongside collards, but the mustard came up faster and tolerated poorer soil. The leaves were thinner, more ragged, and they shrank down to almost nothing in the pot, which meant you needed a bigger armload to fill a bowl. The pot liquor ran pale green with a sharp edge that some people preferred over the heavier, darker liquor from collards. Children who turned their noses up at the greens still sopped the liquor with cornbread because that peppery broth tasted like the bones dressed up in something new. This was a weeknight pot that asked for nothing but time, a handful of greens, and whatever neck bones the butcher had left. Number 23, hot water cornbread. When other supplies ran out, this was the meal that stood between a family and an empty stomach. The recipe could not be simpler. Cornmeal, a little salt, a spoon of fat, and boiling water stirred in until it formed a soft dough. The cook patted it into small cakes by hand and dropped them into a skillet of sizzling grease where they fried up crisp and golden on the outside and tender in the middle. Made with only cornmeal, water, and salt, it was the emergency supper when the cupboard was nearly bare. It went alongside a pot of greens to sop up the pot liquor, or it stood alone with a slice of onion when there was nothing else. Quick, simple, and filling, it carried families through the leanest stretch of the Great Depression. A few cents a meal turned into bread that ate like a meal. Number 23, chicken neck stew with rice. A Memphis butcher in 1942 sold chicken necks for a nickel a pound, sometimes gave them away on Saturday night. The case had to be empty by Monday. She bought 4 pounds, simmered them in salted water with 1 onion and 3 peppercorns for 2 hours. The meat slid off the bone, the broth ran cloudy, the rice cooked in the pot like her, no extra water. The necks went on top to keep warm. She stripped the meat with 2 forks at the table while the children watched and learned. That was how every Memphis cook taught her daughter. The dish fed 7 for 30 cents. The Memphis paper printed it next to a war bond ad and a coupon for canned milk. In those years, nobody threw away the necks. By 1968, the supermarket sold whole chickens, cheap enough that nobody bothered. The butcher case stopped stocking them around 1974. Year after year, the cut got harder to find. You can't even ask for them today. Number 23, hog jowl and black-eyed peas. Most people think of this as a New Year's dish. It was, but during the Depression and Jim Crow, it showed up on Easter tables too, in homes where a whole ham was a dream your family could not afford. Hog jowl was the cheek of the pig, 15 cents at the butcher. Black-eyed peas were 10 cents a pound. Together, they fed your whole family for a quarter. That was the entire cost of your Easter dinner, about $5.50 in today's money. Black-eyed peas were not even American. They came from West Africa, where cowpeas had been cultivated for centuries before the slave trade brought them across the ocean. Food historian Michael Twitty traced that journey in his book, The Cooking Gene, following the cowpea from the fields of Senegambia to the tables of Georgia. On your Easter Sunday, those peas symbolized coins, prosperity, hope. For a family shut out of every door America had, a pot of peas was not failure. It was a declaration. We will eat well and together no matter what. Fried bologna with white bread was a 10-cent dinner that showed up on tables across every black neighborhood in the 1960s and 70s. Not because anyone planned it, but because the refrigerator was low and the energy was lower. A thick slice of Oscar Mayer or store-brand bologna went into a dry skillet over medium heat. Without those slits, 2 cuts like a cross, the meat would dome up in the center and burn at the edges. Done right, the bologna curled slightly, browned in spots, and developed a salty crust that no fancy charcuterie could match. Laid on soft white bread with yellow mustard or a smear of mayonnaise, it was dinner in 4 minutes. Some added a slice of American cheese, others put hot sauce on the bread first, and the old folks who ate it alone at night, they didn't need sides. Just a sandwich, a glass of sweet tea, and the television on low.
Cornbread and pot liquor supper was the kind of meal that grew out of nothing but still felt like everything. Pot liquor, the broth left behind after cooking greens, was never thrown away in a black kitchen. It was liquid gold, full of nutrients and flavored with whatever seasoning or scraps of pork simmered with the greens. Mothers poured it into bowls or skillets, added hot cornbread right from the pan, and let it soak until the bread softened around the edges. Children loved breaking the cornbread into pieces, mixing it into the warm pot liquor until it became thick, almost like a stew. It tasted deeply savory and rich, far more filling than anyone expected from what was technically a leftover. Some nights this meal was eaten quietly, everyone savoring the warmth after long days. Other nights it became a shared moment, kids dipping their cornbread at the same time just to see who soaked up the most cornbread, and pot liquor supper was survival wrapped in tradition. A reminder that nothing in the kitchen ever went to waste. Candied yams made with margarine instead of butter became the holiday staple that delivered sweetness without breaking the budget, transforming humble sweet potatoes into something luxurious. Black mothers would buy sweet potatoes in bulk when on sale, often 5 pounds for under $1, then slice them thick into baking dishes. Margarine, significantly cheaper than butter, was melted with brown sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg to create syrup that caramelized beautifully. Some added vanilla extract or orange juice when affordable, but the core remained simple. The yams baked slowly until softened, and the edges turned sticky with crystallized sugar, creating perfect balance between savory and sweet. Children fought over corner pieces where syrup had thickened into candy-like consistency, while adults appreciated how this dish required minimal ingredients yet delivered satisfaction. Candied yams represented the ability to create holiday magic from basic pantry staples. Hoppin' John was the sound of New Year's Day in the South, pots clanging, laughter rising, and the scent of black-eyed peas filling the air. This dish was simple, yet full of meaning: rice, peas, bits of pork, and hope for a better year. Each ingredient carried its own story. The peas stood for luck, the rice for prosperity, and the pork for forward motion, because pigs root forward when they eat. It was a meal of faith wrapped in humble flavor. For generations, families believed that eating Hoppin' John on January 1st brought blessings, and even those who did not believe never took the risk of skipping it. The taste was earthy, smoky, and grounding, a connection between ancestors and the year ahead. Served with greens and cornbread, it became a complete prayer in the form of supper. The real magic of Hoppin' John was not the ingredients, but the hands that stirred it, repeating a ritual older than memory itself. Cornmeal mush with gravy was the taste of endurance that outlived the Depression and followed people right into the war years. It began with cornmeal whisked into boiling water, stirred until it thickened into a golden, bubbling paste. Left to set, it became firm enough to slice, fry, or drown in homemade gravy. The texture was soft and filling, the flavor humble but satisfying. For those with little money and big families, it was a meal that stretched as far as it needed to. Mothers would fry slices in bacon grease when they could, or serve it plain with onion gravy made from drippings. The smell of it cooking was a reminder that simplicity did not mean lack. It was food that carried people through, one spoonful at a time. Cornmeal mush was living proof that survival could be seasoned with creativity, that dignity could sit right beside thrift on a dinner plate. Fried mackerel fillets brought the sea to the table without breaking the bank. Grandparents bought them salted, sometimes canned, sometimes fresh if the market was kind. Each fillet was rinsed, dried, then dredged in cornmeal seasoned with pepper and a touch of cayenne. When they hit the hot grease, the kitchen came alive with crackles and curls of steam. The fish fried golden brown, the smell sharp and inviting. Served with grits, collard greens, or a slice of cornbread, it was a full meal made from little. The first bite carried crunch, then warmth, then salt that lingered like the memory of the coast. Children learned to eat carefully, picking around the small bones with patience. For many, fried mackerel was the taste of survival and skill, of knowing how to turn thrift into comfort. It was eaten with laughter, with stories of better days and pride in how far they had come. Every piece told the truth that even a poor man's fish could taste like celebration when cooked with love. Cowpeas and rice, pilaf, offered a taste of Carolina heritage that African-American families carried forward with pride during the 1970s. Dried cowpeas soaked overnight were simmered gently with smoked turkey wings or a ham hock until tender, releasing a broth rich with earthy flavor. Long-grain rice was added to the pot, soaking up the seasoned liquid and transforming the dish into a complete meal. Onions, celery, and a hint of thyme gave the pilaf a savory depth, while a dash of hot pepper added subtle heat. Served with cornbread or fried green tomatoes, it filled bellies and satisfied the craving for something both nourishing and steeped in tradition. This was a dinner that honored the resilience of generations who turned humble ingredients into lasting comfort. It carried the memory of fields and family gardens while fitting neatly into busy urban kitchens. Cowpeas and rice pilaf reminded everyone that simple foods, cooked with patience and love, could rival any fancy restaurant meal when shared around a welcoming table. Cowfoot soup was once considered a true stick-to-your-ribs dinner in African-American kitchens, especially during lean years. Made by simmering cow feet slowly for hours, it produced a gelatin-rich broth that thickened naturally. Vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes were added to round it out, but the real heart of the dish was the deep, silky broth that clung to every spoonful. Families believed it gave strength and lasting fullness, which mattered when work was hard and meals were scarce. The dish required patience, since the feet had to cook down until tender, but the result was both nourishing and comforting. It carried a flavor unlike anything else, with a richness that no canned soup could match. Served with bread or rice, cow foot soup fed whole families for pennies. Though it has largely disappeared from modern tables, it once represented resilience, thrift, and a belief in food's power to sustain more than just the body. Prairie chicken was not chicken at all. It was wild grouse or quail, lean and gamey, and harder to catch than it was to cook. These birds were everywhere across the plains in the early days, and they fed whole families with just one shot and a lucky morning. The dressing, what we would now call stuffing, was made with old bread, sage, and whatever herbs you could find or grow in the yard. When it was baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven, the whole cabin would fill with the kind of scent that stopped everyone in their tracks. This meal showed up on tables for Sunday dinner or after a good hunting day. It reminded folks of home, even if that home was just four walls and a dirt floor. The meat might have been tough, the bread might have been stale, but put them together with sage and heat, and they made magic. No one complained. Not when it filled your belly and made the cold nights feel shorter.
Number 22, neck bones and rice. Pork neck bones were cheap, bony, and full of marrow. Browned in a skillet with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, they went into a heavy pot with sliced onions and enough water to cover. 3 hours of simmering extracted every ounce of flavor from the bones and turned the surrounding meat fork tender. The broth that formed was ladled over a mound of white rice, so the grains swelled and softened into a thick, savory porridge. Every plate required a pile of napkins and the patience to pick around small bones. Neck bones were the kind of cut that a black grandmother could buy with pocket change and turn into a meal that fed everyone at the table twice. When pre-cut boneless pork took over the meat counter and a new generation stopped wanting to eat around cartilage, the dish quietly left the Sunday rotation. Number 22, neck bones and green beans. Fresh green beans snapped between the fingers came out of the garden all summer long, and when there were too many to eat raw or fry up quick, they went into the neck bone pot. The beans cooked until they lost every trace of crunch and turned soft and gray-green, saturated with pork fat. Nobody in those kitchens wanted a crisp green bean. Crisp meant undercooked. Done meant the bean had given up its resistance and taken on the flavor of everything around it. A plate of neck bones and green beans with a cold glass of buttermilk beside it was a July supper that did not try to impress anyone. It just filled the house with the smell of slow pork and kept the family quiet until the sun went down. In parts of rural Arkansas and East Texas, families strung green beans on thread and hung them to dry for winter, then rehydrated them in a neck bone pot months later. Those dried beans, called leather britches, came back tougher and chewier with a concentrated flavor the fresh ones never had. Number 22, smothered potatoes and onions. If there were potatoes in the bin and an onion on the counter, supper was already settled. Smothering was one of the great techniques of the Southern kitchen, a slow braise that turned the plain ingredients into something soft and savory. The cook sliced potatoes and onions thin, laid them in a heavy skillet with a spoon of bacon grease, and let them cook down low and slow with the lid on. The steam trapped under that lid did the work, melting the onions into the potatoes until the whole thing went tender and sweet. Toward the end, the lid came off so the bottom layer could brown and form that prized golden crust against the iron. A little salt, a little black pepper, and maybe a splash of water to keep it from sticking was all it took. Served with a piece of cornbread, it made a full plate without a scrap of meat. Pure comfort built from two of the cheapest things in the house. Number 22, pig feet jelly with hot vinegar. A glass mason jar on the back porch shelf in 1945 Charleston, packed with split pig feet, water, salt, bay leaf, and 3 cloves of garlic. She simmered the feet for 6 hours. The meat fell off. The broth turned the color of weak tea. She strained it, pressed the meat into the jar, let the natural collagen do the work. By morning, the whole thing had set into a pale amber jelly. She sliced it cold for supper, served it with hot pepper vinegar in a thin saucer, a stack of saltine crackers on the side. A man came in from the field, ate half the jar, asked for more. The dish needed no icebox in winter. Your grandmother could feed a working man on what the white grocer threw away. That was the genius of her Depression kitchen. You wouldn't think a foot could become supper, but it could. Number 22, deviled eggs with paprika. Every black woman at Easter had her deviled egg plate. Not just any plate, a special carrier with little indentations for each egg half. She carried it to church like a crown, because on Easter Sunday, your eggs were judged. The differences were subtle but deadly serious. Ratio of mustard to mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, or dill, how much paprika went on top. The first known deviled egg recipe appeared in 1877 in the Montgomery Advertiser in Alabama. By the mid-20th century, a dozen eggs cost about 60 cents. Those vintage egg plates from the 1950s and 1960s now sell for $25 to $75 on collector markets. The dish had a practical origin too. After weeks of Lent, your family had accumulated hard-boiled Easter eggs that needed eating. But the real reason deviled eggs mattered was simpler than that. They were one of the few pieces of fancy serving ware that working class black women owned. Presentation was everything. Adrian Miller, the James Beard Award-winning soul food historian, has called deviled eggs one of the clearest shared traditions across the Southern racial divide, a rare point of commonality. That small truth mattered. Tomato sandwiches with mayonnaise only appeared when the garden came in. That short window in July and August when the tomatoes were heavy, warm from the vine, and red all the way through. This was never a winter meal. The tomato had to be sliced thick, almost a quarter inch, laid on soft white bread, spread with Duke's mayonnaise. Always Duke's in the South, where brand loyalty ran deeper than politics. Salt and black pepper on top, nothing else. The bread soaked through from the juice within seconds, and you ate it fast, leaning over the plate so it didn't drip down your wrist. For seniors who still kept a small garden or had a neighbor who brought tomatoes by, this sandwich was the taste of summer itself. No cooking, no heat from the stove, and a sweetness from the fruit that made the meal feel like a gift. Once the season passed, it was gone, and waiting for it to come back was part of what made it matter. A half-pound of ground beef could become a full dinner if you knew what to do with the grease left behind.
Smothered chicken wings were a budget dinner that turned the cheapest poultry cut into something tender enough to fall off the bone. Wings were considered scraps in the 1960s, far from the party food they would become years later. Mothers browned them in a skillet, sprinkled flour to build a roux, and poured in water or broth until it thickened into a gravy that could stretch across a full pot of rice. The wings cooked low and slow, soaking up the gravy until they were soft, flavorful, and irresistible. The whole dish tasted like comfort, the kind that made you sit a little longer at the table just to savor the warmth. Children loved smothered wings because they felt rich even when they were not. Mothers loved them because they fed everyone without emptying their pockets. The gravy was always the real star, thick, savory, and perfect for spooning over everything on the plate. Leftovers rarely survived until the next day because kids asked for more before the pot even cooled. Smothered chicken wings were the kind of meal that made a house feel full even when the budget was not. Collard greens cooked with smoked turkey tails instead of ham hocks provided the traditional side dish at a fraction of the cost, turning a bag of greens into nourishment that carried flavor and cultural meaning. Turkey tails, often overlooked and heavily discounted at butcher counters, contained enough fat and smokiness to season an entire pot for under $2. Black mothers would buy 3 or 4 pounds of fresh collards from produce stands where vegetables stayed affordable. The greens were washed repeatedly until no grit remained, then chopped and added to pots where turkey tails had been simmering with onions and vinegar. Hours of slow cooking broke down the greens until they turned silky, while pot liquor became broth so flavorful that people sipped it from cups. This wasn't just a side dish, but vitamin-rich vegetables that provided essential nutrients. Families served collards alongside everything else, understanding that greens represented prosperity. Oxtails and gravy turned scraps into celebration. Once dismissed as throwaway cuts, oxtails found their way into the center of the table through the genius of resourceful cooks. Simmered for hours until the meat slipped from the bone, they made a gravy so rich it needed nothing more than rice to make it whole. This was food that demanded time, patience, and love. 3 things often in short supply, but always found in these kitchens. The sound of the lid lifting revealed steam and satisfaction. Every bite was a reward for endurance, a flavor earned, not given. In every home where oxtails were served, you could feel a sense of pride rise from the pot. These were meals that told the truth, that beauty and strength could come from what others threw away. Oxtails reminded every generation that flavor has no class. It only asks for care. Red beans and rice was a meal that brought comfort wherever you called home, but it meant something deeper in African American kitchens. It started cheap, just dried beans, salt pork, and a pot of rice. But what came out of that pot was rich in soul. The beans simmered slow, soaking up garlic, pepper, and every bit of seasoning a cook's hand could spare. The rice caught all that flavor, turning a poor man's supper into a dish fit for celebration. This was food that did more than fill bellies. It gathered people together, brought laughter back to weary faces, and reminded families that they still had each other. On Mondays, the smell drifted through New Orleans streets, through shotgun houses and backyards, calling everyone home. It was the kind of food that fed more than hunger. It fed memory, tradition, and pride. One pot, one flame, and one love. That was red beans and rice. Gizzards and rice were the meal that taught flavor from labor. Tough at first, the gizzards demanded patience, cleaned, boiled, and seasoned before ever touching the skillet. Grandparents fried them slow with onions, letting the scent of pepper and grease build into something irresistible. Once tender, they met a pot of rice, plain but proud, soaking up all that savory juice. It was not fancy, but it was rich in spirit, feeding families that refused to waste a thing. Gizzards, the part most people threw away, became the centerpiece of a dinner that stuck to the ribs. The sound of the knife chopping, the hiss of the pan, the quiet hum of the stove, all of it felt like music in a home where nothing came easy but everything was earned. It was dinner built from wisdom, not wealth. Each bite carried gratitude and grit, proof that poverty never lacked flavor. Cornmeal-crusted okra cakes turned a beloved southern vegetable into a crispy entree that delighted both adults and children during the 1970s. Fresh okra pods were sliced thin and mixed with cornmeal, minced onions, and a touch of buttermilk to create a thick batter. Small patties were formed by hand and pan, fried in hot oil until each cake developed a crunchy golden crust with a tender green interior. The nutty flavor of the cornmeal complemented the mild tang of the okra, while a sprinkle of salt right out of the pan sealed in the warmth. Served alongside sliced tomatoes or a dollop of hot sauce, these cakes were both hearty and refreshingly light. They made clever use of garden harvests when okra plants produced more pods than anyone could stew. Families prized the recipe as a thrifty way to transform vegetables into a main dish that felt indulgent. Each bite offered a satisfying crunch and a reminder that the simplest garden gifts could create meals worth remembering decades later. Boiled collards with salted fish was a dish rooted in coastal traditions, where dried or salted fish met the greens of the field. Collard greens, simmered long with pieces of fish, absorbed the salty flavor and produced a broth that families called pot liquor. Served with cornbread on the side, it became a full meal that delivered both nutrition and satisfaction. This dish tied African American kitchens to older traditions of using preserved fish as seasoning when fresh meat was unavailable. The salt balanced the bitterness of the collards while the fish gave body and protein to the broth. Families loved it because it was affordable and could feed everyone at the table. Children might not have enjoyed the strong flavor, but it carried cultural meaning that extended beyond taste. Though rarely seen today, boiled collards with salted fish once represented a connection between land and sea, resourcefulness and survival, and the enduring tradition of turning simple ingredients into communal suppers. You might wrinkle your nose, but fried rattlesnake was a real meal on the frontier. If you were living off the land, you ate what the land gave you, and sometimes that meant a coiled-up surprise near your boots. Rattlesnake meat was surprisingly tender and mild, almost like chicken, and once you peeled the skin and cleaned the bones, it fried up fast. Cornmeal crust gave it crunch, and a sprinkle of pepper or dried herbs gave it flavor. Folks who lived near the desert or in rocky canyons got used to seeing these snakes. Some made it a sport to hunt them, others just got desperate enough to try. Either way, you dipped the meat in egg, rolled it in cornmeal, and dropped it in hot fat. It sizzled, popped, and came out golden. Eaten with dandelion greens or roasted roots, it was more than just edible. It was a story. One you told around a fire long after the danger was gone.
Number 21, Crowder peas with smoked meat. Crowder peas were the field pea that stained the pot liquor brown, darker and earthier than black-eyed peas with a dense, starchy bite that held up to hours of cooking. They went into a pot with a smoked ham bone or a chunk of smoked sausage, a whole onion, and enough water to cover by 2 inches. The pot sat on the back of the stove all morning, the peas swelling and softening while the smoke from the meat worked its way into every bean. By the time the family sat down, the liquor at the bottom of the pot was thick enough to be a meal on its own, poured over cornbread in a glass. Crowder peas were a backyard crop, dried on the vine and shelled on the porch in late summer. The seeds passed between families like currency. When the last generation of home gardeners thinned out, the peas became hard to find, and the Sunday pot went with them. Number 21, neck bone and potato stew. Potatoes were the great stretcher. When the neck bones alone were not enough to fill the table, you cut up 4 or 5 russet potatoes and dropped them into the pot. They soaked up the broth and broke down at the edges, thickening everything into something closer to a stew than a soup. Families who had moved north to Chicago and Detroit during the Great Migration kept this meal alive in cramped apartment kitchens. The pot was smaller, but the method was the same. You browned the bones, covered them with water, seasoned them, and waited. The potatoes went in during the last hour. When they were soft enough to mash against the side of the pot with a wooden spoon, dinner was ready. Number 21, liver and onions. Organ meat was given away nearly free, and black cooks turned it into a supper rich enough to feed a working man. When hogs were butchered, the liver was among the parts handed off rather than kept, which made it one of the cheapest sources of protein in the store. Cooks dredged the slices in seasoned flour, then laid them in a hot skillet just long enough to brown, because liver turns tough the moment it overcooks. The real magic was the onions. A great pile of them went soft and sweet in the same pan, soaking up the drippings, then got spooned over the top with a thin gravy made from the browned bits. The sweetness of the onion balanced the deep iron flavor of the meat. Served over rice or with a slab of cornbread, It stretched a few pennies of organ meat into a hearty plate, cheap, nourishing, and gone too soon from most kitchens. Number 21, cornmeal mush with skim milk gravy, a cast iron skillet on a coal stove in 1943 Detroit. A cup of yellow cornmeal whisked into 3 cups of boiling salted water. The cook stirred it for 20 minutes. It pulled away from the sides of the pan in one piece, glossy and yellow as a winter sun. She poured it into a loaf tin, let it set firm overnight on the cold side of the porch. Morning came. She sliced it 1/2 inch thick, fried each piece in a teaspoon of bacon grease, topped it with skim milk gravy. The supper cost 6 cents and fed 3. The mill on Hastings Street ground the meal. The milkman delivered the skim free because nobody wanted it. Every black household in your block kept a coffee can of bacon grease on the stove, the kitchen heart of your neighborhood. By 1972, both were gone. Number 21, pineapple upside down cake. The moment your grandmother flipped that cast iron skillet and the cake came out perfect, golden and glistening, the whole kitchen held its breath. Not a single pineapple ring out of place. That flip was the most dramatic moment of Easter dinner. Canned pineapple became widely available after the First World War when the Hawaiian Pineapple Company began marketing it aggressively. In 1925, they held a recipe contest that received 60,000 entries. 2,500 of them were for pineapple upside down cake. A can of pineapple rings cost about 25 cents in the 1940s. The cake required just one 10-inch cast iron skillet, which most black households already owned. Betty Cook, food columnist for the Afro-American newspaper, celebrated this cake in a 1955 column read by millions of black Americans. She called it gorgeous with its glistening top. As cast iron cooking declined and box mixes took over, the from scratch skillet version became rare. But if you grew up watching your grandmother hold her breath during that flip, you never forgot. You carry that moment with you. Hamburger steak and onion gravy stretched cheap meat into something that smelled like a Sunday kitchen on a Wednesday night. The beef was seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, shaped into a thick oval patty, and pan-fried in cast iron until browned on both sides. The patty came out, sliced onions went into the same grease, cooking down until soft and golden. A spoonful of flour stirred into the fat, then water or broth added slowly while scraping the bottom. That's where the flavor lived, in the fond, in the bits that stuck. The gravy thickened, dark and rich. The patty went back in to simmer until tender and served over white rice. It was a complete meal for under $1. Seniors who cooked this alone often made enough gravy to save, poured over toast the next morning. It became breakfast too. The women who perfected this gravy never measured the flour. They watched the color and knew.
Red gravy rice bowls were the kind of quick, filling meal mothers made on nights when time and money were both running thin. Red gravy was not the fancy kind found in restaurants, but a simple tomato-based sauce cooked with onions, seasoning, and whatever bits of leftover fat or meat were available. It simmered until the onions softened and the flavors blended into something far more satisfying than its ingredients suggested. Some mothers added a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, while others stirred in a spoonful of flour to thicken it just enough to cling to the rice. The pot bubbled gently on the stove, sending out a warm smell that wrapped the house in comfort long before dinner was served. Mothers spooned it generously over fresh rice, letting the sauce seep into every grain. Children dug in eagerly, blowing on each bite because they never waited long enough for it to cool. They loved how the rice soaked up the sauce, turning a handful of cheap staples into something that tasted whole. It was cheap, warm, and grounding in a way only comfort food can be. Red gravy rice bowls tasted like resilience, the kind families depended on. Macaroni and cheese made from scratch with government cheese became the creamy casserole that turned welfare assistance into something families served with pride. Government commodity cheese, distributed through assistance programs, came in large blocks that creative mothers transformed into dishes that tasted better than store-bought. The cheese had unique texture and sharp flavor that melted beautifully when combined with evaporated milk, eggs, and elbow macaroni bought in bulk. Women layered the mixture in large baking dishes, topping it with extra cheese and sometimes breadcrumbs, then baked until golden and bubbling. The result was dense, creamy mac and cheese that could feed 20 people with just 2 boxes of pasta and 1 block of government cheese. Children loved it because the cheese pulled into strings with each serving. This wasn't bland, watery mac and cheese from boxes, but rich custard-like casserole that required skill to perfect. Black mothers took pride in their mac and cheese recipes. Cornbread and buttermilk was a poor man's feast that never felt poor. A simple wedge of cornbread soaked in tangy buttermilk could calm hunger and restore energy after a long day in the fields. In many homes, this was supper. No meat, no fuss, just what was on hand and made to work. Some added a drizzle of molasses for sweetness, while others sprinkled salt and pepper to make it savory. No matter how it was served, it carried the pride of people who refused to let simplicity mean shame. The crunch of the crust and the cool cream of the milk made a pairing both rustic and refreshing. This was dinner for the weary, made with ingredients that every Southern kitchen kept close. The meal carried no pretense, only purpose. It filled the stomach and warmed the soul. Many elders called it country gold, a dish that required no meat, no sides, just gratitude. It was the taste of making do, of turning necessity into comfort. For those who had nothing else, this was enough, and that was its quiet glory. Collard greens with ham hocks was a dinner that filled the whole house with warmth long before the plates were set. Collards were cheap and grew in nearly every backyard garden, but when simmered with a ham hock, they turned from ordinary greens into something soulful. The pot bubbled for hours, spreading the smoky smell of cured meat through small kitchens and open windows. People joked that you could smell it halfway down the block, and they were right. The liquid, known lovingly as pot liquor, was prized just as much as the greens themselves, rich, salty, and full of nutrients. Some soaked it up with cornbread, others drank it straight. Collards with ham hocks were not just food, they were fellowship. They told a story of roots, community, and patience, showing that even hardship could taste like home when cooked with care and faith. Pinto bean soup was the meal that made hard times taste soft. Grandparents soaked the beans overnight, letting them swell in tin pots while they slept. The next morning, onions, salt, and sometimes a small ham bone went into the water. The kitchen filled with the slow rhythm of simmering, a sound of hope that things would stretch one more day. The broth thickened as it cooked, rich with starch and strength. The smell alone could calm an empty stomach. Sometimes they crushed cornbread into the bowl, letting it soak up every drop. It was food that filled and comforted, humble yet full of soul. Pinto bean soup did not need meat or luxury to matter. It only needed time and patience. Grandparents called it a working man's stew, but it was more than that. It was a reminder that no meal made with love was ever small. Country-style ribs with apple cider glaze turned weekend gatherings into sweet, smoky celebrations in African-American neighborhoods across the 1970s. Meaty pork ribs were marinated in apple cider, brown sugar, and a splash of vinegar, then slow roasted or charcoal grilled until the meat was fall-apart tender. Midway through cooking, the ribs were brushed with a thick cider glaze that caramelized over the heat, creating a sticky surface that clung to every finger. The scent of roasting pork and sweet apples drifted across backyards, drawing neighbors and cousins long before dinner was served. Served with potato salad, baked beans, or simple white bread, the dish balanced tang and richness perfectly. It was both a nod to Southern barbecue traditions and a chance to add a fruity twist that felt fresh for the decade. Country-style ribs with apple cider glaze embodied the joy of family cookouts, where music played late into the evening and every plate carried the flavor of smoke, sweetness, and laughter shared outdoors. Rice and gravy from pan drippings may sound too plain to be dinner, but in African American households, it was often the centerpiece of supper. After frying meat or even vegetables, the drippings left in the pan were turned into gravy with flour and water. That gravy, poured over hot rice, became a full meal in itself. Families appreciated it because rice was cheap and filling, while the gravy added flavor that made plain starch taste indulgent. Children grew up eating this regularly, and it carried a sense of comfort tied to ordinary evenings. Sometimes bits of onion or leftover vegetables were stirred into the gravy, but the heart of the dish was the simplicity of making do with what was available. It represented survival and creativity, turning the smallest leftovers into sustenance. Though it has faded from common memory, rice and gravy from drippings still stands as a reminder that resourcefulness can transform even the humblest ingredients into something worth remembering. This was no frozen grocery store pie. Venison pot pie came from hunters and homesteaders, made with fresh-shot deer meat that had been stewed for hours over low heat. It was mixed with carrots, potatoes, or wild onions if you had them, and poured into a rough pie crust made from flour and lard. The crust was thick, never flaky, and it needed to be. It had to hold up against days-old stew and keep well without a refrigerator. The pie would bake in a heavy Dutch oven, often buried in coals, while the smell filled the entire cabin. It was a special dinner, usually reserved for after a good hunt or around holidays when families gathered. You could slice it like cake and serve it warm or cold. It tasted like salt, smoke, and hard-earned luck. If you had enough venison to make two, you stored one under a towel for the next day. No one ever said no to a second helping.
Number 20, pigtails and brown gravy. Pigtails were the cheapest pork cut the butcher had, often given away or sold by the pound for almost nothing. Chopped into short sections and browned hard in a skillet, they went into a pot with onions, garlic, soy sauce, and brown sugar. 3 hours of slow simmering turned the cartilage gelatinous and the meat tender, swimming in a thick, dark, slightly sweet gravy. The texture was unlike any other pork dish on the table, sticky, rich, and deeply savory. Pigtails were common in black kitchens from Louisiana through the Carolinas, especially in families with Caribbean roots who brought the technique from the islands. The dish crossed borders the same way the families did. By the 1990s, the cut had vanished from most meat counters, and a generation grew up never knowing it existed. Number 20, neck bones and cabbage. A whole head of cabbage cost almost nothing, and when you cut it into wedges and dropped it into a pot of neck bones that had been simmering all day, it turned into something entirely different from raw cabbage. The leaves went soft and silky and took on all that pork and pepper flavor. The cabbage wedges held their shape just enough to lift them out with a slotted spoon and set them on the plate next to the bones. This was a common Monday dinner across the South, the start of a new week on a tight budget. 1 head of cabbage, 1 pack of neck bones, and the whole family ate. The pot liquor from this one was especially good, almost sweet from the cabbage. Here's something worth understanding about neck bones. For most of the 20th century, they were treated as waste. Butchers trimmed them off the larger cuts and sold them for almost nothing, or simply handed them over to whoever asked. In many grocery stores across the South, the neck bones and pig feet and hog maws sat in a separate case, sometimes near the back. The customers who bought them were almost always black. This was not an accident. Generations of black families had learned to build entire meals from the parts of the animal that plantation kitchens discarded. What started as forced scarcity became culinary knowledge that passed from mother to daughter across 2 centuries. The butcher thought he was selling scraps. The woman buying them knew she was carrying home 3 dinners. That knowledge, the understanding of what heat and time and seasoning could pull from a bone, was worth more than anything printed in a cookbook. Number 20, smoked ham, hock, and beans. This was the dish that could stretch one smoked hock across a whole week of dinners. The ham hock was the joint above the pig's foot, a knuckle of skin, fat, and a little dark meat clinging to the bone, and it was sold for next to nothing. But country cooks knew how to make a little meat go a long way. A single smoked hock dropped into a pot of dried butter beans or pinto beans would flavor the entire pot, its smoke and salt seeping into every bean over hours of low simmering. Monday, it was beans and rice. Tuesday, the same pot, reheated and thicker. By midweek, the cook would pull the meat off the bone and shred it back in, and the bone itself kept giving flavor until it was bare. One cheap joint, a bag of dried beans, and a heavy pot turned into supper night after night. A whole week of dinners from a single bone. Number 20, stewed turnip greens with pot liquor bread. A galvanized wash tub of greens on the kitchen floor in 1946 Atlanta. 2 pecks pulled that morning from the back lot. She stripped the leaves from the stems with her thumbs, tore them into ribbons, dropped them into a cast iron pot with a smoked ham hock and a quart of water. The greens cooked down for 3 hours, dark as wet leather. The pot liquor ran the color of strong tea. The pot liquor was the prize. She tore corn pone into a tin bowl, ladled the green broth over it, called the children for supper. Each portion cost 4 cents. The doctor in 1956 told her the broth carried more iron than the steak he couldn't afford to recommend. Your grandmother already knew. She had been cooking it that way for decades. By 1989, the smoked ham hock was a specialty item, and the back lot where you grew the greens was a parking pad. Number 20, hog head cheese. In Louisiana, the butcher made a special Easter batch. Hog head cheese was not cheese at all. It was a cold-cut terrin made from boiled pig parts. Head, feet, ears, tongue, all of it simmered until the natural gelatin from the bones set the meat into a mold. Vinegar kept it preserved. You sliced it thin and spread it on saltines, or stuffed it into a po' boy, or cubed it and ate it like actual cheese. The Poche family of Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, has been making hog head cheese commercially since 1962. They are one of the last traditional operations in the state. The number of Louisiana butcher shops making house-made hog head cheese for Easter has declined by an estimated 70% since the 1980s. This was the ultimate expression of making something from nothing. The parts of the animal nobody else wanted turned into something so good that butchers sold it in special Easter molds, because even scraps deserve to be celebrated. Today, it sells for $8 to $10 a pound. If you are under 40, you have probably never tasted it. When the grocery money ran out 3 days before the check came, eggs and rice with tomato gravy kept the lights on inside the body. This was Depression-era arithmetic carried through generations of black kitchens. A dozen eggs for 30 cents in the 1940s, a cup of rice from a bulk sack, and a can of tomatoes that stretched across 2 meals. Rice cooked plain, eggs scrambled soft in a skillet with butter or bacon grease, pulled off the heat while still wet so they wouldn't turn rubbery. The tomato gravy came together in the same pan. Canned tomatoes crushed by hand, a little sugar to cut the acid, salt, and a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Everything went into one bowl. Eggs on rice, gravy over both. And for a few minutes, the kitchen smelled like someone was taking care of you, even if that someone was yourself. The old ones could tell by the color of the gravy whether it had been made with love or just made to get through. Nobody talked about this one at the family reunion, but everyone knew.
Okra and tomato skillet dinners were a celebration of what could be grown, canned, or shared when grocery money was scarce. Okra came from backyard gardens or neighbors who always had extra to give. Canned tomatoes added brightness and acidity that turned the dish into something filling and hearty. Mothers seasoned it with onions, garlic, and pepper, letting the vegetables stew down until they became thick and deeply flavored. Sometimes a pinch of sugar or paprika went in, just to balance the tang or add warmth. The skillet hissed softly as everything cooked, filling the room with the smell of tomatoes and earth. Sometimes it was served over rice, sometimes with cornbread, and sometimes as the meal all on its own. Children learned early that vegetables could carry a dinner when meat was not part of the budget. They would scoop big spoonfuls onto their plates, pleased by how comforting and familiar it tasted. Okra and tomato skillet meals were proof that survival could still taste good. String beans canned in bulk and seasoned with bacon drippings provided the vegetable side that stretched pennies into portions for crowds, proving preserved vegetables could taste homemade. Black mothers bought cases of canned green beans when on sale, often paying less than 30 cents per can, then transformed them by draining the packing liquid and cooking them down with saved bacon grease. The bacon drippings, carefully stored from breakfast preparations throughout the year, added smoky richness that made even plain canned vegetables taste slow-cooked. Onions sautéed in the drippings first created a flavor base, then the drained beans went into simmer until they softened and absorbed all that porky goodness. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others threw in a ham hock if available. The beans weren't crisp tender but cooked until completely soft, the way older generations preferred vegetables. Children usually won over by these bacon-flavored beans. Neckbone stew was proof that waste never belonged in the African-American kitchen. Tough bones, simmered for hours with vegetables and spices, transformed into something deep and rich, a meal that could stretch for days. It started as a dish of survival. Families saved bones from bigger meals and gave them new life in the pot. Slowly, those scraps turned into something tender, flavorful, and full of heart. What began as desperation became a tradition too good to forget. The broth carried every bit of the bone's flavor, thickened by time and love. What others discarded, these families turned into nourishment. The meat fell off in tender strips, and the soup wrapped the room in a warmth that money could never buy. You could hear stories over bowls of neckbone stew, about survival, about faith, about making the most out of the least. Every spoonful was both defiance and gratitude. It was the kind of food that said, "We may not have much, but we have each other." Sweet potato biscuits were soft, golden clouds of comfort baked right into the heart of wartime kitchens. When sugar was scarce, families leaned on the natural sweetness of homegrown sweet potatoes. Mashed and mixed into biscuit dough, they baked up tender and fragrant, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon, smoke, and love. They were served with butter if you had it, syrup if you were lucky, or just warm from the oven if not. Each bite carried a quiet message. Life might be hard, but there was still room for sweetness. These biscuits graced church suppers, family gatherings, and small kitchen tables alike. They were food for the soul, the kind of treat that reminded families that hope was something you could taste. The golden crust flaked beneath the fingertips, and the soft center melted on the tongue like memory. Grandmothers often baked them on Sundays, saving one pan for the next morning's breakfast. Even the leftovers, if any, were treasures wrapped in cloth. They told a story of endurance sweetened by faith, of women who made miracles with nothing more than flour, fire, and heart. In those biscuits lived the taste of love passed down through generations. Smothered chicken backs were proof that nothing went to waste in a smart kitchen. The backs were the cheapest part of the bird, bony and overlooked, but in careful hands they became tender miracles. Grandparents fried them first in a cast-iron pan, browning the skin to perfection. The drippings turned into gravy, flour, water, and a slow stir until thick and golden. The chicken went back in, simmering until the meat slipped off the bone and the gravy clung to every piece. The smell was deep and familiar, the kind that pulled everyone to the table. A pot of rice sat nearby, waiting to catch all that flavor. It was food born from thrift, yet full of pride. Every bite told the same story, of making do, of feeding many from a little, of turning scraps into something worthy of thanks. Stewed chicken gizzards with onions gave families an economical yet flavorful dinner that reflected both thrift and tradition in the 1970s. Gizzards, often overlooked, were cleaned thoroughly and browned in a heavy pot with diced onions, garlic, and black pepper. Slowly simmered in a rich gravy of chicken stock and a splash of vinegar, the gizzards grew tender while the sauce thickened into a glossy coating. Served over white rice or with buttery cornbread, the dish delivered deep, savory satisfaction that belied its modest cost. The slow cooking filled the house with a comforting aroma that recalled Sunday dinners after church and lessons passed from grandmother to grandchild. For many households, this recipe turned inexpensive cuts into a meal full of warmth and pride, proving that every part of the bird could shine when handled with care. Stewed chicken gizzards with onions stood as a quiet reminder that resourcefulness and patience could transform humble ingredients into a feast worthy of celebration and family gratitude. Pickled pig's feet with crackers may sound like a snack today, but in the 1950s it was often eaten as a full dinner plate in African American households. The feet were simmered, then packed in vinegar brine until tender and tangy. Served cold with a stack of crackers, they offered protein, fat, and flavor at almost no cost. Families valued them because they made use of parts of the hog that others discarded, turning waste into sustenance. The vinegar gave the dish a sharpness that cut through the richness, making it both refreshing and hearty. Children might wrinkle their noses, but many adults grew up seeing it as a delicacy tied to memory and survival. This dish reflected the cultural habit of using every part of the animal, honoring thrift and tradition. Though it has nearly vanished outside of specialty shops, pickled pig's feet with crackers once carried pride, practicality, and a unique taste that is rarely experienced today. This was the beating heart of cowboy cooking. Beans and bacon went everywhere, from wagon trains to cattle drives to back porch suppers. You started with pinto beans, dried and soaked overnight if you had the time. They were tossed into a big pot with water and a heavy slab of salt-cured bacon. That bacon was not the kind you fry for breakfast. It was dense, brined, and meant to last. As it cooked, the beans soaked up all the fat and salt, turning soft and smoky. You stirred it with a wooden spoon, checked the fire, and hoped it would be done by sundown. There were no frills, just beans, pork, and patience. If you had a biscuit or a chunk of cornbread on the side, you counted yourself lucky. This was a meal that stuck with you, gave you warmth, and made sure you could ride or work all the next day.
Number 19, smothered pork chops, bone-in pork chops, thick cut and seasoned with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder were dredged through seasoned flour and browned in a cast iron skillet until the coating turned golden on both sides. The chops came out and a full onion, sliced thin, went into the same pan with the drippings. The onions cooked down until they softened and started to color. Then a few spoonfuls of flour went in to make a roux right there in the pan. Water or broth loosened everything into a gravy, and the chops went back in, nestled into the sauce with the onions draped over the top. The lid went on, and the heat dropped to the lowest flame the stove could hold. For the next 2 hours, that skillet sat untouched. The gravy thickened around the meat, the flour coating on the chops dissolved into the sauce, and the onions broke down until they were no longer slices, but part of the liquid itself. The pork turned so tender that the bone pulled clean with no resistance. The gravy left behind was not something poured from a jar. It built itself from the meat, the flour, the onion, and the long patience of a covered pan. Smothered pork chops were the Sunday dinner that required no occasion and no announcement. The cook picked up a package of chops on Saturday, and by noon on Sunday, The house smelled like onion gravy and black pepper, and everyone knew what was coming. It was dependable food, made the same way every time, and it carried the weight of a real meal without the cost of a roast. The dish lost its hold when boneless chops replaced bone-in cuts and oven-baked recipes replaced the slow skillet. A smothered chop cannot be made fast. The whole point was the waiting, and the waiting is what disappeared. Number 19, neck bones and rice. If there was one meal on this list that showed up more often than any other, it was neck bones over rice. Rice stretched everything. A single pound of neck bones that would barely feed 2 people on its own could feed a table of 6 when it sat on top of a mound of white rice. The rice soaked up the broth, the rendered fat, the salt, the smoke, all of it. Every grain carried flavor by the time a fork reached it. Families bought rice in large bags because it was the cheapest starch in the store, cheaper than flour, cheaper than potatoes, and it kept in the pantry for months without going stale. The cooking was simple. The neck bones went into the pot first, simmered until the meat was tender and the broth had gone dark and concentrated. Then the rice was cooked separately because nobody wanted it mushy from sitting in the pot too long. The bones and broth went over the rice at the table, and everyone spooned it out of the same serving bowl. In households across Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Carolinas, this was the meal that appeared when there was nothing else to plan. No recipe, no discussion, just rice and bones. Some families added a splash of hot sauce. Others stirred in a spoonful of butter. Most ate it plain because the broth was already doing all the work. The pot could sit on the back burner for hours, and the longer it sat, the better the broth got. Children came home from school, lifted the lid, and knew exactly what dinner was without asking. The smell told the whole story. This was not a meal anyone chose from a list of options. It was the meal that chose itself when the pantry was almost bare and payday had not come yet. Number 19, salmon croquettes. Few things smelled more like a black household waking up than a can of salmon hitting a hot skillet. The dish began with a single tall can of pink salmon, the cheap kind packed in its own salty liquor with the soft bones and skin still inside. The cook would crack it open and tip it into a bowl, then go in with bare hands, crushing the little vertebrae between her fingers because those bones carried calcium and nobody wasted them. In went a beaten egg, a handful of cracker crumbs, or a spoon of cornmeal, finely diced onion, and a shake of black pepper, sometimes a little chopped bell pepper for color and snap. The mixture came together cool and slightly sticky, holding the shape of a patty when pressed between 2 palms. Then the skillet, a film of hot grease, the wet hiss as each cake went down, and that smell rising through the house, briny and golden, pulling sleeping children out of their beds. They fried until the edges set into a deep mahogany crust and the kitchen window fogged at the corners, grease snapping every time the cook flipped one with the back of a fork. There was a reason this dish appeared so often, and it was not only the price. Government nutrition workers had figured that a single can of salmon mixed with a little flour and 1 egg held enough protein to unlock the niacin buried in cornmeal and ward off pellagra for a family of 4 when eaten once a week. That made it medicine that tasted like a treat. So it became Sunday food or Saturday night into Sunday food, set out beside a mound of grits or a bowl of rice with a wedge of hot sauce on the rim of the plate. Crisp and craggy outside, moist and flaky within, the little bones gone so soft that no child ever noticed them. A nickel can of fish dressed up into something worth saying grace over. Number 19, hominy and fatback grits, a low country Sunday breakfast that ruled kitchens from Charleston to Savannah. A 10-quart pot on a propane burner in 1948 Charleston. 3 cups of dried hominy soaked overnight in lye water made from wood ash, rinsed twice in the morning. The fatback was cured pork belly with the rind on. The cook sliced it thick with a butcher knife she had sharpened every Saturday for 30 years. She rendered it slow until the cracklings floated golden. The grease ran clear. She lifted the cracklings out with a slotted spoon, set them on brown paper for a sandwich the next day, stirred the hominy into the rendered fat for 40 minutes. The kernels burst soft and golden. Salt and black pepper were the only seasoning. The pot fed 9 for 20 cents. A field hand ate it for breakfast, walked 4 miles to the field, worked through to supper without complaint. The fatback rind went into a paper sack on the back porch, got fried up the next day on a wedge of cornbread. The dish was the working answer to a Lent that lasted past Easter. The hominy came from a Geechee mill that ground corn the same way the Gullah women had for centuries. The recipe moved from mother to daughter like a Bible verse. This was the kind of cooking nobody had a name for yet. It sat on every Sunday table you walked past from Charleston to Savannah. By 1962, the lye treatment was banned in commercial kitchens. Home cooks switched to canned hominy. The texture wasn't the same. The dish quietly disappeared. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1948. Number 19, tea cakes. Before there were Cadbury, eggs, and Peeps, black children on Easter morning found baskets filled with their grandmother's tea cakes, lightly sweet cookies made from butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and vanilla. A single batch yielded 3 to 4 dozen. The total ingredient cost during the Depression was under $1. Tea cakes were created by enslaved cooks trying to replicate the English tea cakes they baked for plantation owners. After emancipation, the recipe became a staple in your family's kitchen. For Easter, grandmothers made large batches and filled children's baskets with them instead of store-bought candy. The cookies had a character you could not find in any store. Lightly crisp on the outside, cake-like crumb inside, sweetness so subtle it whispered instead of shouted. During the Great Migration, families carried the recipe north, but in the cities, tea cakes had to compete with commercially available Easter candy. By the 1980s and 1990s, most families had stopped making them. Author Elbert Mackey wrote an entire book dedicated to preserving tea cake stories, recognizing the tradition was disappearing. When the grandmothers died, the baskets went empty. Vienna sausages, straight from the tin, were the dinner that happened when dinner didn't happen. When the legs were tired, the stove felt too far, and the body just needed something before bed. The small can popped open with a pull tab, and the pale little sausages sat in their broth like something between a meal and an apology. Eaten cold with saltines and a squirt of yellow mustard, or picked up with fingers one at a time, this was a dinner measured in silence. It cost 35 cents in the 1970s. It required nothing, no cooking, no plates if you didn't want one, no effort beyond pulling the tab. For seniors living alone in small apartments after their families moved away, this was Tuesday night and Wednesday and sometimes Friday. Nobody judged it out loud because everyone had a can in the cabinet. The people who ate Vienna sausages for dinner weren't ashamed. They were tired, and tired is its own kind of hungry.
Fried mackerel fillets were the fish dinner families depended on when fresh fish was too expensive, but canned or inexpensive mackerel could still be bought. Mothers seasoned the fillets lightly, dipped them in cornmeal, and fried them until the edges crisped and the center stayed flaky. Sometimes they added a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce if they had it, but even plain, the fish was flavorful enough to satisfy hungry children. The sizzling sound from the skillet made every child drift into the kitchen. Served with rice or bread, the fillets stretched surprisingly far. Mothers often cooked extra rice just to make sure the fish fed everyone, and somehow it always did. They smelled salty and rich, like a small celebration, even on an ordinary night. Kids ate them with big smiles, enjoying how the crisp coating cracked under their teeth. Fried mackerel fillets were the taste of the ocean made affordable through skill, not money. Cornbread dressing, made from dried-out bread and day-old cornbread, turned stale leftovers into the savory stuffing that anchored Thanksgiving plates throughout Black communities. Mothers saved bread ends, biscuit pieces, and cornbread scraps in bags for weeks before the holiday, letting them air dry until rock hard so they'd absorb maximum liquid without turning mushy. On Thanksgiving morning, those saved breads would be crumbled and mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and sage, then moistened with chicken broth made from boiling backs and necks. Some women added finely chopped giblets, while others relied purely on vegetables and herbs for flavor. The dressing had to be moist enough to hold together but dry enough to crisp on top when baked. This wasn't bread cubes from expensive store-bought loaves, but carefully accumulated scraps transformed through skill. The golden brown top provided textural contrast to soft interior. For Black families, cornbread dressing represented resourcefulness, elevated to tradition. Chicken and rice perlo was the Low Country's quiet masterpiece, a dish that carried centuries of African knowledge in every grain. Rice, brought and cultivated by enslaved Africans, became the foundation of Southern life, and perlo was its proud expression. In Charleston and the Sea Islands, every family had its own version, some with sausage, others with shrimp or rabbit. No matter the variation, the secret was patience and timing, passed from one generation to the next. The rhythm of stirring and waiting mirrored the rhythm of a people who built beauty from endurance. Pieces of chicken browned in a single pot, then simmered with rice, onions, and broth until every bit of flavor fused together. The smell drifted through the house long before dinner was called. It was a one-pot wonder, simple, practical, and filled with heritage. Families ate it together, each bite a lesson in patience and preservation. In its steam was the story of hands that toiled the earth, yet still found time to cook beauty into existence. Perlo was not just sustenance, it was survival elevated into art. Fried cornbread, sometimes called hot water bread, was the quick fix when flour ran low and hunger ran high. A handful of cornmeal, a pinch of salt, and a splash of boiling water. That was all it took. The batter hit the skillet with a hiss, puffing up into golden patties that crackled at the edges. Crisp outside and tender inside, they were eaten with greens, beans, or just on their own. It was the kind of bread that came together fast and filled every stomach around the table. Folks joked that hot water bread was born out of stubbornness because no shortage could stop people from making something warm to eat. It was humble, yes, but it held pride, flavor, and the kind of history that keeps families strong even when times are lean. The sound of it frying filled the room with life, and the smell carried straight to the porch. Children would watch, waiting for the first piece to cool, their mouths watering. Some cooks added a touch of bacon grease for richness, others fried them plain, relying on the corn's sweetness alone. Each patty was a small victory, a promise that even the simplest meal could feel whole when shared with love. Fried bologna sandwiches were the weeknight heroes of the kitchen. Bologna hit the hot skillet with a sizzle, the edges curling like petals as it browned. Grandparents flipped each slice just once, careful not to burn the good parts. The smell was sharp, salty, and rich, filling the house faster than the hunger could. White bread waited on the counter, sometimes toasted, sometimes soft, and mustard or hot sauce turned it into magic. When money ran short, this sandwich saved the day. It was fast, filling, and full of character. Kids loved the crunch at the edge, the way the heat softened the bread just enough to make it melt in your hands. Grown folks knew it for what it was, a humble blessing. Fried bologna sandwiches tasted like memory and invention, like comfort built on what little was left. Baked stuffed eggplant with shrimp brought a taste of the Gulf Coast to African American tables far beyond Louisiana during the 1970s. Large eggplants were halved and hollowed, their flesh sautéed with onions, celery, bell pepper, and Creole spices before being folded into a creamy mixture of shrimp and breadcrumbs. The seasoned stuffing was packed back into the shells and baked until the tops turned golden and fragrant. Each bite offered the sweetness of shrimp, the earthiness of eggplant, and a gentle heat from paprika and cayenne. Families served it with crusty French bread or a simple green salad, elevating an ordinary evening into something memorable. This dish captured the spirit of coastal kitchens where seafood and spice met in perfect harmony, and it traveled inland through family reunions and church suppers. Baked stuffed eggplant with shrimp celebrated both innovation and heritage, showing how a single vegetable could carry the bold flavors of the sea straight to a home kitchen in any corner of America. Cow tongue stew was another dish that stretched thrift into flavor, simmering what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Tongue was cheap and often overlooked, but when braised slowly with onions, peppers, and garlic, it became tender and rich. The meat had a texture similar to roast beef, making it both hearty and comforting. Families who could not afford expensive cuts relied on tongue as an affordable way to bring meat to the table. Served over rice or potatoes, it filled plates and stomachs without emptying wallets. Though some children avoided it once they knew what it was, many still loved the taste and never forgot it. Cow tongue stew represented resilience, using skill and patience to make overlooked parts of the animal delicious. Today it is rare to see it served, but in the 1950s it was a sign of both thrift and pride in the kitchen. It showed that nothing was wasted and everything could be made into supper. Rabbit was one of the few meats you did not have to buy. You trapped it, you skinned it, you cooked it over a low flame and gave thanks for every bite. Stewed rabbit with wild onions was a meal of real effort. Catching the meat was half the battle, but cleaning it was even harder. Once in the pot, the meat softened slowly, and the onions, dug from fields or creek beds, gave it a sweet, peppery edge. Sometimes folks added vinegar or dried apples just to stretch the flavor. You could serve it over biscuits or eat it straight from the pot. This was food for people who made do with what they had and did not ask for more. It was quiet, filling, and honest. A dish that reminded you that hunger does not care about preferences. You ate to keep going. You ate because something had to.
Number 18. Baked chicken quarters with onion gravy. Leg and thigh quarters, the cheapest chicken at the store, seasoned and laid in a baking dish with thick slices of onion underneath. A cup of broth went in, aluminum foil sealed the top, and the dish baked for 2.5 hours at low heat. The chicken steamed in its own juices until the meat fell off the bone and the onions melted into a sweet, savory gravy at the bottom of the pan. This was a Sunday dinner that appeared when there was not enough money for a whole bird. 1/4 per person, gravy over rice, greens on the side. Simple enough that a teenager could handle it alone, slow enough that nobody rushed the oven or the afternoon. Number 18, neck bones and pinto beans. Pinto beans were the workhorses of the dried bean shelf. They cost almost nothing, stored for years, and doubled in size overnight in a bowl of water. Soaked and simmered with neck bones, they turned creamy on the inside while holding their shape just enough to give the pot some texture. The broth went thick and brown, somewhere between a soup and a stew, heavy enough to coat the back of a spoon. Families in Texas and Oklahoma kept a bag of pintos in the pantry the way other households kept bread. When the pintos went into the neck bone pot, the meal stretched far enough to feed whoever showed up unannounced, because someone always did. A bowl of pinto beans and neck bones over cornbread with a raw onion sliced on the side was a supper that cost pennies and held you through a full day of work. Number 18, Hoppin' John. Born in the low country rice fields, this one-pot supper carried West Africa straight to the southern table. It came from the Gullah Geechee, people of coastal South Carolina, descendants of enslaved Africans who paired the rice they knew how to grow with black-eyed peas, a legume with deep African roots. Food historians trace it back to Tibo Niebe, a Senegalese rice and bean dish, and to wake from Ghana. The cooking was plain and forgiving. Black-eyed peas simmered with a piece of smoked pork until soft. Then rice went into the same pot to cook in that seasoned liquid until the grains drank it all up. One pot, two cheap staples, and a scrap of pork was enough to feed everyone at the table. By New Year's, the dish carried meaning too. The peas standing for coins and good luck in the year ahead. Filling, frugal, and rooted in history older than the South itself. Number 18, smothered oxtails with onion. A heavy enamel Dutch oven on a coal range in 1947, Cleveland. 4 pounds of oxtails, dredged in flour, browned on every side. They wore a dark crust. The cook poured off most of the grease, added 2 yellow onions, sliced thick, 3 cloves of garlic, a quart of beef broth from the bones the day before. She covered the pot, slid it to the back of the range, let it braise 4 hours while she did the wash. The oxtails came out fork tender. The gravy was the color of strong coffee. The onions had melted into the sauce. She served it over white rice with stewed collards and a wedge of cornbread fresh from the oven. The dish fed 6 for 35 cents in 1947. That was the whole bill. Your grandfather ate it on Sunday after church, the way his father had before him. It signaled your family had survived another week. Number 18, baked macaroni and cheese. The Easter version was not the stovetop kind. It was a custard-style casserole baked with eggs and evaporated milk until it came out firm enough to slice. Golden brown, crust on top. Every family had a slightly different recipe, and the debate over sharp cheddar versus Velveeta could divide a congregation faster than a new pastor. Here's the part you probably do not know. The man credited with preparing one of the first macaroni and cheese dishes in America was James Hemings, born 1765, enslaved by Thomas Jefferson from birth. Jefferson took him to Paris in the 1780s, where Hemings trained in French cuisine. He brought the recipe back to Virginia. Hemings negotiated his own freedom in 1796. Let that sit with you. One of the very few enslaved chefs to ever do so. He died in 1801 at age 36. A block of sharp cheddar cost 30 cents a pound in the 1940s. It runs $5 to $7 now. An enslaved black man made macaroni and cheese for the president who owned him. Then it became the most beloved dish at free black Easter tables. That tells you everything about who really built this country's food culture. Here is something nobody talks about when they talk about Easter dinner. For black families during Jim Crow, Easter Sunday was the one day you ate like royalty in your own home. The rest of the year, segregation told you where to eat, where to sit, which water fountain to drink from. But on Easter Sunday, inside those walls, none of that existed. The table was set with the best china. Children wore brand new outfits. The food had to be immaculate, not because anyone was coming to inspect it, because dignity required it. After the Great Migration, when over 7 million Black Americans left the South between 1915 and 1970, Easter dinner became proof that home still existed. A family in Bronzeville or Harlem would set a table that looked exactly like the one back in Mississippi. Same ham, same greens, same cake, recipes carried in memory across 1,000 miles. Easter dinner was not about showing off. It was about refusing to be diminished. Grits with butter was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what you served alongside. Proof that the simplest dishes often provided the deepest comfort. Stone ground or regular grits were cooked slowly with water or milk, stirred frequently to prevent lumps until they reached a creamy consistency that held its shape on a spoon. A generous pat of butter stirred in at the end added richness that transformed humble corn into something almost luxurious. For seniors on fixed incomes, grits cost pennies per serving and satisfied hunger for hours. They could be dressed up with cheese, topped with eggs, or served alongside fish, sausage, or vegetables. The dish required patience but little active work, and the reward was a bowl full of warmth that connected you to generations of Southern tables where grits was simply a part of life. The butter hit the hot iron first, then the corn, and the sizzle told you everything about how the next 5 minutes would go.
Cabbage and sausage pot dinners were beloved because cabbage was cheap, filling, and strong enough to stand up to long cooking. Mothers sliced the cabbage thinly, added onions, potatoes, and just a few coins worth of cured sausage. As it cooked, the sausage flavored the whole pot, giving every bite that smoky richness even though the meat itself was scarce. Sometimes mothers added pepper flakes or vinegar to brighten the pot, and the whole mixture softened into something soothing and hearty. Children felt like they were eating something rich and comforting, even though most of the volume came from vegetables. The pot simmered slowly, filling the kitchen with steam and warmth during cold evenings. Kids felt lucky whenever this meal appeared because it tasted like more than the ingredients suggested. Cabbage and sausage pot dinners were winter survival disguised as comfort food. Potato salad stretched with extra eggs and mayonnaise became the cold side dish that fed crowds for minimal cost, transforming basic potatoes into creamy satisfaction. Black mothers boiled potatoes by the 5-pound bag, timing them carefully so they'd be firm enough to dice without turning to mush, then combined them with hard-boiled eggs that provided protein. The ratio was crucial. Enough eggs to make the salad filling, but not so many that it tasted only of eggs, with mayonnaise binding everything together. Mustard added tang, while finely diced celery and onions provided crunch and flavor dimension. The true economical genius came from using potatoes as filler, allowing a single dozen eggs to feed 20 people when stretched with enough starch. Some families added sweet pickle relish for both flavor and the satisfaction of having extras in their salad. The salad chilled overnight, making it perfect for gatherings where oven space was limited and make-ahead dishes were essential. Turnip greens and pot liquor were the soul of Southern resilience. The greens simmered slowly with ham hocks or smoked turkey, soaking up every drop of flavor the meat could give. But it was the leftover broth, the pot liquor, that held the real power, dark, rich, and full of nutrients that kept generations strong. Some folks would save jars of it in the icebox, reheating it for days until it deepened into liquid comfort. Others swore by it as medicine, a cure for whatever hardship you carried. In every home that made it, the pot liquor wasn't just broth. It was inheritance. People saved it like treasure, sipping it straight or mopping it up with cornbread. This was medicine and meal in one, born out of a world that left no room for waste. The smell of greens cooking filled small kitchens with the scent of home, no matter how little there was. In the South, to share your pot liquor was to share your blessing. It was more than food. It was a reflection of endurance that could never be erased. Pinto bean cakes were genius in their simplicity. Leftover beans from last night's pot were mashed, mixed with flour and onions, and fried until golden brown. What had started as scraps became something new, something delicious. The cakes were crisp at the edges and soft in the center, hearty enough to stand on their own or to sit beside rice or greens. It was a meal made by hands that refused to waste, by people who understood that nothing in the kitchen should ever be thrown away. The scent of frying bean cakes was homely and warm, a small reward for hard work. Each bite tasted of thrift, resourcefulness, and quiet pride. It was proof that survival could be creative, and that good cooking never depended on wealth, only wisdom. The sound of the pan crackling was the sound of resilience itself. A sprinkle of salt, a turn of the spatula, and the world felt right again. Served with hot sauce or ketchup, they turned into a feast from the plainest of ingredients. Bean cakes taught children early on that waste was not an option, and that love could be fried up right alongside supper. Cabbage and smoked sausage was the one-pot wonder that could feed a crowd. A single sausage link, sliced thin, was all it took to flavor an entire head of cabbage. Grandparents threw it all in a big pot with onions, pepper, and a spoon of grease. The cabbage wilted slow, its pale green turning gold in the steam. The smell filled every corner of the house, warm and inviting. Served with rice or cornbread, it made a full meal out of scraps. Each bite was smoky, sweet, and soft, the taste of making enough for everyone. It was not fancy, but it was always filling. Even when the sausage was barely there, its flavor carried through the whole dish. It was the kind of food that brought everyone to the table and kept them grateful. Charcoal grilled quail with herb marinade showcased the game meats that still appeared on African American tables in rural southern communities during the 1970s. Small quail were marinated in olive oil, garlic, fresh thyme, and a hint of lemon before being placed over glowing coals. The quick grilling seared the skin to a crisp while keeping the meat moist and tender inside. The fragrant smoke of herbs and wood mingled with the natural flavor of the bird, creating a meal both rustic and elegant. Families often served the quail with skillet cornbread, roasted sweet potatoes, or simple greens, letting the delicate meat take center stage. It was a reminder of older traditions when hunting and farming supplied the evening meal, even as supermarkets grew more common. Charcoal grilled quail brought people outdoors, turned dinner into a gathering, and honored the knowledge of elders who understood how to coax deep flavor from a small but prized bird shared in good company and soft twilight. Fried saubali with molasses was a dinner that blended savory and sweet in a way that still lingers in memory. Saubali, or pork belly, was inexpensive and high in fat, making it a common ingredient for working families. Sliced and fried crisp in a skillet, it was then drizzled with molasses, turning it into a dish that balanced salt, fat, and sweetness. Served with cornbread or potatoes, it made a plate that was both filling and deeply flavorful. Families loved it because it elevated a humble cut into something special, a small indulgence during hard years. The molasses gave the pork a sticky, caramelized coating that made the dish memorable for children and adults alike. Though it disappeared as leaner cuts became more common, fried sow belly with molasses once represented creativity and comfort. It proved that even the simplest, cheapest ingredients could create meals that felt indulgent and satisfying in every bite. Cornmeal mush was the grit beneath the grit. You boiled it into a thick, almost rubbery porridge that could be eaten hot with butter or poured into a tin, chilled overnight, and sliced for frying. On cold frontier mornings, it was the fastest way to feed a family and keep them moving. Add a slice of sausage, pan-fried and dripping with molasses, and you had something that felt like luxury. This was the kind of meal you ate before walking into a snowstorm, cutting wood, or birthing a calf. It was hot, sticky, and stuck in your teeth, but you would not complain. Molasses was easier to find than sugar and lasted longer in the pantry. That one spoonful made you feel like everything was just a little sweeter than it was. This dish might sound plain, but back then it tasted like gold.
Number 17, short ribs in brown gravy. The short rib was a working class cut, bone-in, fatty, and tough until you gave it time. Short ribs were dredged in seasoned flour, browned in a hot skillet, then transferred to a deep pot with onions, garlic, and just enough water to make a gravy. The lid went on and the heat stayed low for 3 hours. By the time they came off the stove, the meat had pulled away from the bone and the gravy had turned thick and dark. This was not barbecue. This was stovetop, braising with no recipe and no timer. The cook checked by feel, and when the bone wiggled loose, dinner was ready. Served over white rice or egg noodles with the gravy poured heavy. This meal survived on its simplicity. That same simplicity is what made it easy to forget once the faster options arrived. Number 17, neck bones and egg noodles. Egg noodles were not something every family kept, but the ones who did swore by them. The noodles were wider and denser than spaghetti, and they held up better in a heavy pork broth without turning to mush. Families dropped them into the pot after the neck bones had simmered for 2 hours, and in 15 minutes, the noodles went soft and slippery, coated in rendered fat. The broth thickened from the starch and turned silky in a way that plain water and bones alone never could. In parts of Tennessee and Virginia, this was a cold weather meal that came out when the temperature dropped below freezing and the kitchen windows fogged up from the steam. Children ate the noodles first and went back for the bones, sucking the marrow out and stacking the clean bones on the edge of the plate like a small monument to what had been supper. Number 17, fried chicken livers. When a chicken was dressed for Sunday, the livers were never thrown out because they made a supper all their own. These little dark morsels came nearly free, the part most folks today never think to cook. The cook would rinse them, roll them in seasoned flour, and slide them into hot grease where they spit and crackled and crisped up fast. The outside turned crunchy and brown, while the inside stayed soft and rich. A few minutes was all they needed, and a small bowl of them went a long way. Some families served them over rice with a spoon of pan gravy. Others piled them onto a plate with hot sauce and ate them with their fingers straight from the skillet. Cheap, quick, and deeply savory, fried chicken livers turned a handful of giblets into a real meal, a reminder that nothing on the bird ever went to waste. Number 16, cornmeal mush. This was breakfast, supper, and tomorrow's lunch, all from the same humble bag of meal. The cook stirred cornmeal slowly into a pot of boiling salted water, whisking hard so it would not clump, then let it bubble and thicken into a soft porridge. Eaten hot that night with a little molasses or a pat of fat, it warmed the body straight through. But the real economy showed up the next day. Whatever mush was left got poured into a loaf pan and set aside to firm up overnight as it cooled. By morning, it had set solid enough to slice. Those slices went into a greased skillet and fried until both sides turned crisp and golden, eaten with syrup or alongside whatever meat there was. One pot eaten 2 ways with nothing wasted between. Corn and water turned into 2 meals by simple patience. A poor man's dish that asked for almost nothing and gave back warmth. Number 17, sweet potato pie. During Jim Crow, white America dismissed this pie as poor man's food. The reason was simple and ugly. Black people ate it, so black families doubled down. They made it the pride of every Easter table, turned a stigma into defiance, one slice at a time. The original sweet potato pie was nothing like what you would find in any store today. Enslaved people made crustless versions, cooked directly in the hearth using molasses and whatever spices they could get. No pie pan, no rolling pin, no flour for crust. After emancipation, when black cooks gained access to their own equipment, the crusted pie emerged. The sweet potato itself connected back to West Africa. Enslaved people recognized it as a cousin of the yam, a staple of the homeland they had been stolen from. 3,000 miles and a lifetime of suffering away from home, this one vegetable tasted like your ancestors' memory of freedom. Abby Fisher published a sweet potato pie recipe in her 1881 cookbook, possibly the first printed recipe of its kind by an African-American author. She was illiterate. The recipe lived in her hands before it ever lived on a page. Fried corn in a skillet started in the garden and ended on a plate still steaming. Fresh corn was cut from the cob with a sharp knife, the blade scraping afterward to release the milky starch that made it creamy without cream. In winter, canned corn worked, drained and dried so it wouldn't spatter. Into the skillet with butter or bacon grease, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar to pull the sweetness forward. 3 or 4 minutes until the edges brown and caramelized, sugars turning golden, butter going nutty, the kitchen filling with a smell sweet enough to make you forget you were eating alone. For Black seniors in the rural South, fried corn was often the entire meal, a skillet's worth, maybe with bread, eaten at a table set for one. The little can had a devil on the label, and the spread inside looked like nothing you served to company.
Chicken backs and necks gumbo was the kind of dish that came from deep knowledge, the kind mothers inherited from generations who knew how to stretch poultry scraps into something extraordinary. Backs and necks were the cheapest parts of the bird, often sold for pennies. Mothers browned them, added a dark roux, and slowly layered in vegetables like celery, onions, and bell pepper. The gumbo simmered for hours, building flavor until the whole house smelled like Sunday even on a weekday. Sometimes a leftover bone or a tiny bit of sausage went in just to deepen the broth served over rice. It became a feast built from scraps. Children never realized how inexpensive it was. They only knew how good it tasted. It warmed the belly, lifted the spirit, and made even the leanest pantry feel full. Chicken backs and necks gumbo was survival turned into heritage. Chicken quarters baked instead of turkey gave families affordable poultry that still felt special, allowing Black mothers to serve bird on Thanksgiving without spending $20 on turkey. Leg quarters sold for less than 50 cents per pound in the 1970s, and when bought in bulk bags, they became even more economical. Mothers seasoned them heavily with paprika, garlic powder, black pepper, and whatever herbs the cabinet held, then baked them slowly until the skin crisped golden and the meat stayed tender. The dark meat remained moist, even with extended cooking, making them more forgiving than turkey breast. A 10-pound bag of chicken quarters could feed 20 people when accompanied by generous sides. The drippings collected in baking pans became bases for gravy, ensuring nothing went to waste. Children actually preferred chicken to turkey because it was familiar and easier to eat. Baked chicken quarters taught families that tradition could be adapted. Catfish stew was a riverbank tradition, built from the waters that sustained entire communities. Fresh-caught catfish cooked with onions, tomatoes, and peppers made for a dish that hit every sense. In fishing towns, it was the meal of both work and reward. The catch of the day turned into supper for all. Every fisherman had a secret ingredient, a pinch of sugar, a splash of hot sauce, or the patience to let it simmer just right. It was a stew that tasted like freedom, pulled straight from nature's hand. It was smoky, spicy, and hearty, often shared in big pots during family gatherings or church picnics. The stew captured the essence of Southern resourcefulness. What you caught, you cooked, and what you cooked, you shared. It was a meal that bound families and neighbors through flavor and fellowship. The broth turned red from tomatoes, the fish tender enough to melt against your tongue. Around those fires and tables, laughter echoed louder than hardship. Catfish stew was life lived honest, hard-earned, humble, and full of flavor that could make you forget the day's troubles. Turnip greens and rice were food for the weary but nourishment for the strong. The greens, bitter on their own, mellowed into flavor when boiled down with a little fat or bone. The rice soaked up everything, turning the dish into something both filling and healing. It was simple, yes, but it carried the essence of home, steam, spice, and the rhythm of spoons against bowls. Sometimes families added bits of salt pork or even a splash of vinegar to wake up the taste. Most times, though, it was just greens and rice, humble and whole. It fed everyone, from the field hand to the school child, giving strength for another day. In kitchens lit by single bulbs and hope, this meal was not just eaten. It was shared, savored, and remembered. The steam rose from the pot like a prayer, curling in the air as laughter filled the room. It was a dish that brought silence to hunger and calm to the hardest of hearts. Turnip greens and rice were proof that nourishment did not need luxury, just patience, warmth, and a steady hand to stir the pot. Salmon croquettes were the feast that came from a can. Grandparents mixed canned salmon with chopped onions, a little cornmeal, and an egg to hold it together. The mixture sizzled in the pan, forming golden patties that smelled like celebration. Outside, they were crisp and brown, inside, soft and savory. Served with grits or bread, they turned an ordinary night into something special. Kids called them fish cakes and ate them fast, the crunch echoing across the table. Sometimes a bit of hot sauce went on top for heat, sometimes ketchup for sweetness. No matter how they were served, they were always gone before they cooled. Salmon croquettes proved that flavor came from creativity, not cost. They were rich with pride and memory, the taste of survival wrapped in golden crust. Hominy and smoked sausage casserole delivered stick-to-the-ribs comfort for busy households that needed both convenience and flavor in the 1970s. Canned white hominy was combined with slices of smoked pork sausage, onions, and mild chili peppers, then mixed with a creamy sauce of milk and cheddar cheese. Baked until bubbling and golden on top, the casserole emerged with a smoky aroma and a rich texture that satisfied the biggest appetites. Each serving provided a gentle kick of spice alongside the mellow corn flavor of the hominy, a taste rooted in native and African American foodways. Families loved how easily the dish came together and how well leftovers reheated for the next day's lunch. It offered a warm balance of tradition and practicality, showing how inexpensive pantry ingredients could still create a meal that felt special. Hominy and smoked sausage casserole reminded diners that true comfort is not about cost, but about the deep flavors that speak of heritage and shared evening meals. Cornmeal dumplings in pot liquor were a staple of Southern African American kitchens, where nothing went to waste. After collard greens or turnip greens were boiled, the leftover broth, rich with nutrients and pork flavor, was called pot liquor. Cornmeal dumplings, simple mixtures of cornmeal and water, were dropped into that broth and simmered until tender. The result was a starch-heavy, comforting dish that cost pennies but filled stomachs. Families valued it because it made the most of what was already cooking, turning leftovers into a whole new meal. For children, dumplings in pot liquor were warm and familiar, often tied to memories of sitting around the table with family. The dish reflected both resourcefulness and tradition, showing how African American households transformed scraps into suppers that carried meaning. Though rare today, cornmeal dumplings in pot liquor stand as one of the most powerful examples of thrift meeting comfort. They were practical, soulful, and unforgettable for those who grew up eating them. This was not an everyday dinner. Buffalo meat was a rare and sacred thing, hunted with care and shared with reverence. When settlers got their hands on some, they treated it like a holiday. The roast was slow-cooked over fire or buried in a pit with hot stones, and the juices were thickened into a gravy using wild juniper berries crushed with a rock or spoon. The result was smoky, slightly bitter, and rich beyond measure. Juniper gave it that wild taste, something sharp, something old. This dish came from a time when nothing was farmed and everything was earned. It fed big families, whole camps, or traveling parties headed west. Nobody wasted a bite, and nobody ever forgot the taste.
Number 16, stewed pig feet. Pig feet was split by the butcher, scrubbed clean, and dropped into a pot of salted water with onion, celery, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar. The vinegar cut through the richness and kept the broth from turning heavy. 4 hours of simmering broke down the skin, fat, and cartilage until the feet collapsed into a soft mass of gelatin and small bones held together by nothing but habit. The meat was scarce but intensely flavored, tucked into crevices between joints. Eating pig feet was slow, deliberate work done with both hands and no pretense about table manners. In black kitchens throughout the Deep South, pig feet was Saturday night food that carried over to Sunday lunch, the leftover broth spooned over rice or cornbread. The dish required no expensive ingredients, just the parts of the hog that nobody with choices would claim. When packaged meat replaced whole animal butchering and younger cooks turned away from anything that looked like what it was, the stewed pig foot lost its place at the table. Every dish so far shares the same quiet arithmetic: a cheap cut, a heavy pot, a low flame, and half a day. These were not elaborate meals. They were exercises in transformation. The women who ran those kitchens understood something the modern food industry has spent decades trying to make people forget. The cheapest ingredients become the richest food if you leave them alone long enough. That knowledge was not taught in schools or printed in cookbooks. It moved from stove to stove, hand to hand, corrected in real time by women who measured nothing and wasted less. The Sunday kitchen was not just where the food was made, it was where the knowledge lived. And when that kitchen emptied out, the knowledge left with it. Number 16, neck bones and black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas carry more superstition than any other bean in the southern pantry. Eating them on New Year's Day was supposed to bring luck for the rest of the year, and most families took that seriously enough to make sure the pot was full by noon on January 1st. But black-eyed peas with neck bones was not a once-a-year occasion. It showed up whenever the dried peas were on hand and the budget was thin, which was most weeks. The peas cooked faster than pintos or limas, breaking down in about an hour into a thick, starchy pot that clung to the rice underneath. The neck bones gave them a depth that salt alone could never reach. Families in Georgia and the Carolinas grew black-eyed peas in the garden between the corn rows because the plants fixed nitrogen in the soil and helped the corn grow taller. The food fed the family and the garden fed itself. That was the kind of efficiency that did not come from a textbook. It came from people who had been watching dirt and weather for generations. 15, smothered chicken. A single tough old hen too tired to lay became a Sunday-worthy supper through the patience of smothering. This was not the crisp fried bird of the holidays. It was the everyday way to cook a cheap, stringy chicken until it surrendered. The cook browned the pieces in a heavy skillet, then deglazed the pan with a little broth or water, scraping up the dark browned bits that held all the flavor. Seasoning went in, the lid went on, and the whole thing simmered low until the meat pulled away from the bone and the liquid thickened into a deep brown gravy. A sliced onion melted into the sauce, sweetening it. By the end, one small bird had become a pot of tender meat swimming in gravy, enough to spoon over a mountain of rice and feed a full table. Served over rice or potatoes, it turned the toughest hen into comfort. Slow cooking made the cheapest chicken taste like a feast. Number 17, fried bologna and biscuit sandwich. A round of red rind bologna on the butcher counter in 1944 Pittsburgh. 20 cents a pound. The War Ration Board rewrote the rules every other Tuesday. She cut 4 thick slices, scored each one with an X to keep it from puffing, laid them in a hot iron skillet with a teaspoon of bacon grease. The edges curled into little cups that held the grease. The centers turned the color of a warm brick. The biscuits were buttermilk, baked that morning in the same skillet. She split them, laid the fried slice on the bottom half, pressed the top down so the grease soaked through. A coal miner ate 2 for breakfast and a third in his lunch pail wrapped in waxed paper. That was breakfast. The sandwich cost 5 cents in 1944. Your grandfather carried one like it into the coal seam every morning. It was the shift food of every miner from Pittsburgh to Beckley. The dish disappeared by 1980 when the bologna lost its red rind. Number 16, collard greens with ham hocks and pot liquor saved. If your family was black and southern, the greens were mandatory. Every Easter table had them. But the way they were cooked has changed so much that the original version is nearly gone. A ham hock simmered for 4 to 6 hours with pounds of greens until they turned soft and deeply flavored. The pot liquor, that is the cooking liquid, was saved, served separately, drunk from a cup, or sopped up with cornbread. Pouring it down the drain would have been unthinkable. That habit of eating slow-cooked greens and drinking the pot liquor is specifically West African in origin, not European. The greens symbolize money at Easter and New Year's because the flat leaves look like paper currency. A traditional pot required 2 to 3 pounds of greens and 1 smoked ham hock. That hock cost $2 to $3 in the 1960s. It runs $5 to $8 today, plus half a day of your patience. Modern quick recipes cook greens in 30 to 45 minutes. The pot liquor barely has time to form. The nutrition that kept your people alive when there was nothing else gets tossed with the water. That would have broken your grandmother's heart. No, but potted meat on crackers fed more solitary dinners than anyone will admit. Potted meat, a paste of mechanically separated chicken and beef trimmings packed into a 3-ounce can, cost less than a quarter in the 1960s. It spread onto saltines with a butter knife, the texture somewhere between pâté and surrender. The taste was salty, vaguely meaty, and oddly satisfying when you stopped expecting it to be something else. Seniors kept cans stacked in kitchen cabinets beside the Vienna sausages and sardines, the holy trinity of no-cook survival. This was the dinner you ate when you didn't tell your kids what you had. When they called and asked, you said you ate fine, and you did. You ate. Whether it was fine depended on what fine meant when the house was empty and the check was still a week away. Potted meat wasn't a meal anyone chose. It was a meal that chose you.
Soya grits and ground beef skillet dinners were a product of the government era, when soy-based foods were sent to low-income households to stretch meat supplies. Mothers browned a small amount of beef, added the soya grits, and seasoned everything until it tasted far richer than it looked. Sometimes a handful of onions or peppers went in, or a bit of leftover broth to deepen the flavor. The mixture thickened into a hearty skillet meal that fed many children at once. Kids did not always know what was in it, but they knew it filled them up and tasted good with bread or rice. It had a creamy, savory texture that surprised families the first time they tried it. Mothers relied on it because it was reliable, cheap, and easy to adapt. Soya grits and ground beef skillets were resourcefulness at its most practical, proof that mothers could turn even government-issued ingredients into comfort. Sweet potato pie made from scratch with lard crust became the dessert that delivered holiday sweetness without requiring expensive ingredients, turning humble root vegetables into celebration. Black mothers baked their own sweet potatoes until soft, then mashed them with evaporated milk, eggs, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla when affordable. The filling was rich, smooth, and naturally sweet, requiring less added sugar than other desserts, making it economical and delicious. Pie crusts made with lard rather than butter saved money while producing flaky, tender pastry. Some women topped their pies with meringue made from leftover egg whites, creating impressive height without additional cost, while others left them plain. A single pie cost less than $2 in ingredients, yet could be sliced into 12 portions, making it far more economical than cakes. The pies were often baked the day before Thanksgiving. Red beans and rice was Louisiana's way of turning Monday into something worth celebrating. Traditionally made with leftovers from Sunday's meal, it became a symbol of smart cooking and steady rhythm. Red beans simmered all day with sausage or ham bones, filling homes with a slow-building aroma that promised comfort. Mothers stirred the pot while doing laundry or hanging clothes, knowing dinner would be ready when the sun went down. Kids came home to that same scent every week. It was routine turned ritual. Even the smallest bowl tasted like consistency in an unpredictable world. The rice stretched it further, feeding large families for pennies. Each spoonful carried the taste of spice, smoke, and survival. This was food that respected both time and thrift, a recipe that turned labor into love. Even when money was short, a pot of red beans could make any house feel rich. It was simple, sustaining and unshakably soulful. The kind of meal that turned ordinary Mondays into memories. Cabbage and potatoes with fatback was the kind of dinner that came from both patience and pride. It started with simple ingredients, just a head of cabbage, a few potatoes, and a piece of salted pork. But it ended up tasting like something far grander. The fatback sizzled first in the pan, releasing its smoky aroma that filled the house and made stomachs growl. Then came the cabbage and potatoes, frying and steaming together until tender and glistening. The salty richness from the pork flavored every bite, turning two humble vegetables into a full meal. It was a one-pan supper that needed no extras, no fancy seasoning, just time and care. Families cooked it when payday was still far away, yet it always brought a sense of comfort. This was food that worked hard to remind people they were still home, still together, and still able to make something beautiful from what little they had. Rice and gravy suppers were the soul of weeknight dinners, simple and satisfying. Grandparents browned whatever they had, chicken scraps, neck bones, or even onions alone, to make a base for the gravy. The drippings told the story, turning flour and water into gold. The smell was deep and comforting, rising from the pan like a promise. Hot rice waited patiently in a pot nearby, ready to soak up every drop. It was not fancy, but it was enough to fill every stomach and calm every worry. The first spoonful always tasted like home, salty and rich, carrying the flavor of care. When times were lean, the gravy was thin, but the love stayed thick. Every plate was scraped clean, nothing left behind. It was the dinner that kept families steady, warm, and thankful. Proof that comfort did not need luxury, just a stove, some rice, and a little faith. It fed more than hunger. It fed hope. Grandparents knew that a good pot of gravy could fix most of life's small troubles. Sometimes it was made with leftover roast or chicken drippings saved from the night before. Other times it was built from nothing more than fat and flour, stirred until the color turned perfect. The magic was in the patience, the slow whisk, the right smell, the moment it thickened. In that moment, the kitchen turned into a place of peace. Turnip greens with pepper sauce brought a sharper, brighter flavor to the Southern greens tradition cherished by African-American families in the 1970s. Fresh turnip greens were washed carefully, then simmered with smoked turkey necks or salt pork until tender, infusing the pot liquor with rich, savory depth. A splash of homemade pepper sauce, made by steeping hot peppers in vinegar, added a lively tang that cut through the richness and woke up the palate. Served with cornbread to soak up every drop, this dish offered an alternative to the more common collards or mustard greens while carrying the same sense of comfort and history. The combination of earthy bitterness and vinegary heat created a memorable contrast that kept everyone reaching for seconds. Turnip greens with pepper sauce proved that humble vegetables could deliver bold character when treated with care. It was a simple yet powerful reminder of how African-American cooks transformed garden harvests into soulful meals that nourished both body and memory. Baked coons or raccoon meat was once a common rural dish in African-American communities where hunting remained a necessity. Raccoon was skinned, cleaned, and baked slowly with onions, peppers, and spices until tender. Sometimes the meat was stewed into gravy and poured over rice or potatoes, turning wild game into family supper. It was an accessible source of protein for households that could not afford store-bought meat, and hunters took pride in bringing it home. The flavor was gamey but savory, and when seasoned well, it was remembered as comforting and hearty. Children may have been squeamish about it, but for many families it was simply another part of survival. As supermarkets grew and hunting declined, baked raccoon disappeared from most dinner tables. Today it is nearly forgotten, but it once represented self-reliance, cultural tradition, and the ability to turn even the most unconventional meat into nourishment. Baked coons carried memory, heritage, and pride that still deserve recognition. Hominy was corn but tougher. It had to be soaked in lye, boiled until it puffed and split, then rinsed again and again to make it safe to eat. What came out was chewy, earthy, and just strange enough to feel like something ancient. It was not the kind of corn you threw on the cob. This was corn that had been through something. Fatback, on the other hand, was just what it sounded like: thick slices of pork fat, cured with enough salt to last through the hottest summers and coldest winters. On their own, each ingredient was rough. But together, they became a dish that worked like fuel. You layered the hominy and fatback in a pot, sometimes added a little grease or onion, and baked it until it bubbled up thick and heavy. The top might brown if the fire was hot enough, but even when it did not, nobody turned it down. It was dense, it was greasy, and it stuck to your ribs like armor. In a place where meals were counted in effort, not elegance, this one always showed up on time. It did not ask to be liked, just eaten.
Number 15, country-style steak smothered in onion gravy. Cube steak or round steak, pounded flat, seasoned, dredged in flour, and browned in a cast iron skillet. Then sliced onions went in, a cup of water, and the lid came down. 2 hours later, the steak was tender enough to pull apart with a fork, swimming in thick brown onion gravy that tasted like it had been building all week. Across the Carolinas, Georgia, and Alabama, this was the dinner that appeared when there was not enough money for a roast. The cut was cheap and the technique did all the work. Served with mashed potatoes and a spoonful of gravy over everything, it felt like a bigger meal than it was. Country-style steak disappeared when cube steak stopped appearing in the meat case at smaller stores. The chains consolidated their cuts, and this one did not survive. Number 15, neck bones and field peas. Field peas are smaller and earthier than black-eyed peas, with a mineral taste that comes from the iron in the soil where they grew. They were a garden staple across the rural South, and when the fresh pods came in during summer, families shelled them on the porch in the evening and cooked them the next morning with whatever bones were in the house. Neck bones and field peas made a pot that could be served 3 ways across a week. The first night, straight from the pot with cornbread. The second night, over rice with hot sauce. The third night, mashed up and reheated in a skillet with a little bacon grease until the edges got crispy. That third version, the fried down leftovers, was sometimes the best one. Nothing in the pot changed, only the method changed and the meal felt new each time. Number 14, dirty rice. The name came from the way chopped chicken livers and gizzards speckled the white grains until the whole pot looked dirty. This was thrift cooking at its cleverest. The giblets that came tucked inside every chicken, the parts most kitchens discarded, were finely chopped and browned in a skillet with onion, celery, and bell pepper. That savory mixture got folded into cooked rice along with the pan drippings, staining the grains brown and loading them with deep, meaty flavor. A whole skillet of it cost almost nothing because the most expensive thing in it was the rice. It stretched a few cents of organ meat across a dish big enough to feed everyone, and it tasted far richer than its price. Working families across the South kept it in heavy rotation precisely because it turned scraps into something that ate like real meat, bold, savory, and proof that flavor never needed money. A full pot born from the parts other folks threw away. Number 16, liver and gravy over rice. A pound of beef liver on the butcher's paper in 1945 New Orleans. Deep purple, dressed in flour, she sliced it thin, dredged each piece, seared it in bacon drippings 2 minutes aside. The outside browned, the inside stayed pink. The liver came out, 3 sliced onions went in, sweated soft, caramel color. The kitchen smelled sweet enough to bring the children in from the yard. She made the gravy in the same pan with the fawn, a tablespoon of flour, and a cup of water from the rice pot. The whole supper went over a plate of long, grain Carolina rice. It cost 12 cents and fed 4. Your grandmother served it once a week the way her mother had during the Depression. Liver was a Wednesday staple in every working kitchen. By 1973, liver had become a punishment children whispered about on the school bus. The dish vanished. Number 15, candied yams without marshmallows. The original candied yams had no marshmallows anywhere near them. They were cooked on the stove top in a cast iron skillet. Sweet potatoes, sliced thick, slow cooked in butter, brown sugar, nutmeg, cinnamon, and vanilla until they caramelized into a glossy, sticky glaze. The marshmallows came from a corporation. In 1917, Janet Mackenzie Hill, founder of the Boston Cooking School magazine, created the marshmallow-topped sweet potato casserole for the Angelus Marshmallow Company. A marketing campaign permanently altered a Black culinary tradition. By the 1950s, 75% of sweet potato casserole recipes in mainstream cookbooks included marshmallows. The stovetop skillet version, the original, has largely disappeared from your table. But here is what the marshmallows buried. Enslaved people recognized the sweet potato as a cousin of the yam from home. 3,000 miles from West Africa, this one vegetable carried memory. After emancipation, sweet potatoes were one of the few crops formerly enslaved people could grow on small plots of land. The yam was independence. The marshmallow was a corporate intrusion nobody asked for. Butter beans with ham hock turned humble ingredients into something that tasted like slow Sunday afternoons. Dried butter beans soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with a smoked ham hock until the beans turned creamy and the meat fell off the bone. The broth became silky, flavored with onion, garlic, bay leaf, and black pepper. For seniors cooking alone, this dish was practical. One pot, minimal preparation, and enough food for several days. The ham hock cost little but delivered tremendous flavor, infusing every bean with smoky depth. The beans provided protein and fiber, making this a complete meal. Served over rice or with cornbread, butter beans with ham hock proved that patience and simple ingredients could warm both body and spirit.
Rice and gravy plates were the kind of dinner that proved a single pan of drippings could be stretched into something that tasted far richer than it cost. After frying chicken or pork, mothers saved every drop of fat left in the skillet, scraping up the brown bits stuck to the bottom. They sprinkled a little flour into the pan, stirring slowly until it turned the right shade of brown, then added water or broth to build the gravy. Onions went in if the family had any, softening down until they melted into the sauce. Meanwhile, a pot of rice bubbled on the stove, its steam fogging up the windows on cold evenings. When everything was done, mothers spooned the gravy over big mounds of rice, letting it soak through every grain until the plate was heavy, warm, and comforting. Children loved how the gravy seeped to the edges, turning simple rice into something that felt complete. It was a meal built from scraps, but it never tasted that way. Rice and gravy plates were the quiet heroes of weeknight dinners, turning leftovers into nourishment. Pinto beans, slow-cooked with ham bone scraps, provided protein-rich side dishes that cost almost nothing, yet fed crowds with stick-to-your-ribs satisfaction. Black mothers would soak dried beans overnight, then simmer them all day with ham bones scavenged from previous meals, creating broth that was rich with smoky, meaty flavor. The beans themselves cost less than 50 cents for a 2-pound bag that swelled to feed 20 people when cooked with onions, garlic, and bay leaves. This wasn't quick cooking, but all-day simmering that transformed hard-dried beans into creamy, tender morsels swimming in thick, flavorful liquid. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others let the ham bone provide all seasoning needed. Children might have initially resisted beans, but when served alongside cornbread for sopping up pot liquor, even picky eaters cleaned their plates. Pinto beans represented economic wisdom passed down through generations. Gullah crab rice was coastal genius, born from saltwater hands and the rhythms of the Carolina tide. It was a dish that told the story of the Gullah people, descendants of enslaved Africans who carried their rice-growing knowledge across the ocean. The crab, fresh from the water, met rice cooked slow and steady, seasoned with the patience only experience brings. It was never just about the food, it was about preservation. Every time someone cooked it, they kept alive a piece of language, rhythm, and identity that history tried to silence. Eating it was a way to remember who you came from. Each bite tasted of the sea breeze, the marsh, and the legacy of survival. It was not fancy, but it was powerful. Every grain was history you could taste. Families would gather near the shore, cracking shells, sharing stories, and savoring the flavor that connected them to generations before. Gullah crab rice wasn't written in any book, but it never needed to be. It lived on through memory and repetition. The rice stretched the meal, the crab gave it richness, and together they made life taste just a little more abundant. Liver and onions was the meal that divided the table. Some loved it, others only learned to. Still, it was a staple for families who knew the value of nourishment over preference. Liver was cheap, packed with iron, and one of the few meats available when rationing made everything else scarce. Mothers dredged the slices in flour, dropped them into sizzling pans, and topped them with sweet caramelized onions to soften the flavor. The scent was sharp and earthy, but it meant dinner was near. Children might scrunch their noses, but their parents knew this meal kept them strong. Liver and onions was not a luxury. It was resilience on a plate. It taught people that food could heal, even when it did not delight. And somehow, between the onion's sweetness and the liver's strength, the bitterness of hard times always faded by the last bite. Families passed down their own small tricks, soaking the liver in milk, adding a splash of vinegar or a touch of sugar to the onions. Each variation told a story of trying to make hardship taste a little softer. The clinking of forks and quiet hum of appreciation at the table made it clear that this meal, plain as it was, fed more than just bodies. It fed endurance. Cornbread and buttermilk was the quiet comfort that ended many long days. Grandparents crumbled leftover cornbread into big bowls, then poured cool buttermilk over the top until it softened. The tang met the sweetness of the corn, creating a flavor that felt like home. It was eaten slow, with a spoon, sometimes in silence, sometimes between stories. No stove was needed, no fancy ingredients, just what the house already had. It was breakfast, supper, or a midnight snack, dependable and kind. The meal cooled the body in summer and soothed the soul in winter. It reminded families that simplicity had its own kind of richness. Grandparents said it tasted best after a hard day's work, when hunger met gratitude. Cornbread and buttermilk was proof that the simplest things often held the most heart. The sound of the spoon scraping the bowl was steady, familiar, and peaceful. It was the kind of food you didn't rush, the kind that let the day fall away while you ate. Children grew up watching their elders eat it, learning that comfort didn't need sugar or spice, just love and something made by hand. Braised goat with sweet peppers carried the vibrant spirit of the Caribbean straight into African-American kitchens of the 1970s, becoming a celebratory centerpiece whenever family and friends gathered. Lean goat meat was marinated overnight with garlic, thyme, allspice, and a splash of vinegar before browning in a heavy pot to build a deep base of flavor. Bright red and yellow peppers joined onions and tomatoes in the braise, creating a rich sauce that balanced gentle sweetness with earthy spice. The slow cooking transformed the goat into meltingly tender pieces, while the peppers softened into a silky accompaniment. Served with steamed rice or soft cornmeal dumplings, the dish filled the house with an irresistible aroma that signaled a special occasion. It reflected both African and Caribbean influences and told the story of migration, resilience, and joyful adaptation. Braised goat with sweet peppers stood as proof that family celebration did not need extravagance, only time, care, and a pot large enough to welcome everyone who came to share the meal and the memories made around it. Souse meat with vinegar and peppers was a tangy loaf that turned scraps into something families truly valued. Pig heads, ears, and other parts were boiled down until tender, seasoned with peppers and spices, then cooled until the broth turned gelatinous. Sliced cold, it was eaten with bread or crackers, making a thrifty dinner that filled stomachs when little else was available. African-American families appreciated it because it wasted nothing and carried a bold flavor that stood out compared to plainer dishes. The vinegar gave it sharpness, the peppers added heat, and the texture was unlike anything else at the table. Children sometimes hesitated, but for adults it was a taste tied to survival and tradition. It was also served at gatherings, reminding everyone how community meals grew out of resourcefulness. Though rarely made today, souse meat was once a reminder that flavor and thrift could meet in unexpected ways. Its disappearance speaks to changing tastes, but for many it still recalls home and heritage in every bite. Riverside meals were always about what you could pull out of the water, and catfish was as good as it got. Thick-bodied, whiskered, and slippery, they were a challenge to catch but worth every second of the fight. Once cleaned, the fillets were dunked in flour or cornmeal and fried in a skillet over open flame until they sizzled brown at the edges. The oil crackled, and the fish turned crisp on the outside and soft as butter inside. What made this dish stand out, though, was the sorghum vinegar sauce. Made from syrup cooked down with sharp vinegar and sometimes a dash of wild herbs, it was poured over the catfish just before eating. The sweetness hit first, then the tang, then the smoke from the fire itself. It was an evening meal that brought comfort after long days of river labor or ferry hauls. Served with beans or wild greens, it was not fancy, but it had bite. And in a world where meat came with risk, the catfish was a dependable gift. If you knew how to clean it right, season it just enough and keep your fire steady, you could turn a slippery catch into something you would dream about again tomorrow.
Number 13, chitlins. Chitterlings required a full day before they ever touched the stove. Cleaned, scraped, and rinsed in cold water over and over until the water ran clear, they demanded a level of preparation that no other cut of pork required. Once clean, the intestines were cut into short lengths, placed into a large pot with onion, garlic, bay leaves, red pepper flakes, and apple cider vinegar, and simmered for 4 to 5 hours. The smell was unmistakable and unapologetic. It filled the house and drifted into the yard, and anyone who grew up in a household that cooked chitlins knew that smell meant Sunday. The finished product was tender, chewy, and deeply savory, served with hot sauce and vinegar on the side. Chitlins were the most labor-intensive Sunday meal in the black kitchen and the most divisive. You either grew up eating them or you did not, and there was rarely a middle ground. When the younger generation refused the cleaning work and the smell, the pot stopped appearing, and a tradition that stretched back to slavery ended at the kitchen door. Number 12, neck bone and rutabaga stew. Rutabagas are ugly. They look like oversized turnips with waxy purple skin, and most people walking through a grocery store today would not know what to do with one. But Depression-era black families knew. You peeled them, cubed them, and put them in the pot with neck bones. They cooked down slower than potatoes, held their shape longer, and had a slightly bitter, earthy flavor that stood up to the richness of the pork. Rutabaga stew was a cold weather meal in the rural South, especially in the hill country of northern Alabama and North Mississippi, where rutabagas grew well in rocky soil. This is one of the meals on this list that genuinely faded. Younger generations did not learn to cook with rutabagas because they did not grow up seeing them in the kitchen. Number 13, smothered turkey wings. A pound of fresh turkey wings cost 19 cents at the meat counter in 1957. Most white shoppers passed the wings by because they didn't know what to do with them. Your grandmother knew exactly what to do. She washed the wings in cold water, dredged them in flour, seasoned with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and a pinch of poultry seasoning, and browned them in a skillet of bacon grease until the skin was crisp like paper. Then the wings went into a deep pot with 2 yellow onions, 3 stalks of celery, and 4 cups of water. The lid went on. The pot simmered on the back burner for 2.5 hours. By supper time, The meat was falling off the bone, and the broth had turned into a thick mahogany gravy. She served the wings over rice with the gravy ladled across both. 6 children licked their fingers clean. You'd watch the wing bones get picked over twice. Number 15, ham hock and lima beans. A 2-pound bag of dried baby limas on the kitchen table in 1946 Mobile, soaked overnight with a teaspoon of baking soda. The cook drained them, rinsed them, dropped them into a Dutch oven with a smoked ham hock the butcher gave her free. She added a yellow onion stuck with 3 cloves, a bay leaf, enough water to cover by 2 inches. The pot simmered 4 hours while she ironed shirts. The hock came out. She stripped the meat, stirred it back in, salt last so the beans stayed tender. She served it over white rice with a wedge of corn pone and a slice of raw onion. The dish fed 5 for 9 cents. That was the whole bill. It ran the family from Wednesday to Friday, and any week the paycheck came up short. Your grandmother kept the recipe in her head the way her ancestors had since the cotton fields. Not a single one of those dinners required a recipe book. They lived in the hands of the women who made them, passed along by watching, by standing next to the stove, by being told just once how much salt was enough. If any of these meals brought back a memory for you, leave it in the comments because somebody else in this room remembers the same kitchen. Subscribe so you never miss another trip back to that table.